Okay, when I did that first Q&A some weeks ago, it was just because someone suggested it, and I really didn't expect there to be any kind of response, and I was surprised at how many people asked any questions. And as I mentioned in my prep for this I got so many questions that I apparently had to do another video, and so I left the board open. Would anyone like to ask me anything? Uh, I have, let's see, this is 6 pages of questions to go through over here. So I'm going to do my best to get through them tonight. I may not have time because it is much later in the night than I intended to. I have been getting crushed. I have been getting curb stomped at work. In fact, I do apologize in advance because I usually make an effort to not do the cutting thing and the editing thing and splice in between, shots. But the simple fact of the matter is I may have to because there's actually an issue outstanding right now with Surveyor that I may have to be called over to go help with. So the simple fact of the matter is I may have to. I apologize. I'm going to try and get through these as best as I can, and we'll see where this goes. All right, so I did organize these as, to some degree by general category. We've got general stuff, games, and more games, and then gaming, MMOs, Mass Effect, because it was big enough to have a category of itself, and then Grab Bag, which is the rather large one. I don't want to rush through these per se because I want to give each question the time and attention it deserves and give it the proper level of response. But the fact of the matter is, I am kind of crunched for time. Literally, I mean, my shift ends in a couple hours here, so I'm going to try and be as fair as I can. So let's start off here. Okay, first question: are you going to do another Q&A session? Yes, I am going to do another Q&A session. Let's see. I also have to mention Diddyist Catch. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that right, from my Dragon Age review, does get a cookie for successfully guessing the Zycon quote I put in there. How do I pronounce my name? I already said this once completely by accident, but my name is pronounced Arsheangaya, or I should say my nickname, Arsheangaya. And the next question, of course, is why the name Arsheangaya? Arshe is a Greek word. It has to do with the primary sense of beginning, origin, the first cause. It can also be used to mean power, sovereignty, or domination, something like that. And energemata, or energeia, depending on how you prefer that, is something from Aristotle's works and has to do with happiness, such as eudaimonia, or pleasure. For example, pleasure is an energeia of the human body and mind, whereas happiness is simply the energeia of a human being a human. It's actually kind of complicated, and I'm not going to get into all of it, but I studied Greek, and I usually use Greek words to make up my nicknames because they're never taken. Nobody ever uses Greek. So that's why. Where am I in this video? This is the Cube Farm here at the company I work. The actual place I usually work, where all my videos used to be, is right over there in the knock, where I may be called to shortly, as I just mentioned. And this is actually a very small cube farm compared to where I have worked. It only goes about 15 feet that way and about another 20 feet that way. And as you can see, it's just the single aisle because there's the other edge of the cubes right over there. So, next question. A little bit of a build-up. In the start, you talked about the Witcher games and the lottery. What I wanted to ask was, would you accept a sponsor gift from your viewers on Steam? Now, that's actually really flattering, to be completely honest with you, such that that thought never even occurred to me because of a couple of reasons, which I'll get into in more detail in a minute. But and by a minute, I mean later. I don't know where that question is. There's another question that has to do with that. But to summarize, the main reason why I say the lottery is because the lottery, to me, if you'll forgive me for diverging for just a moment, doesn't mean money per se. The money would be nice, but technically I have money now. What I don't have right now is time. Anybody who has a job like I do, a full-time job, knows exactly what I'm talking about. It's such a consumption of your daily waking hours. It's ridiculous, and there's essentially no getting around it. There's time spent prepping for work, time spent doing errands, which has to fill in the cracks, time spent getting recovered from work, especially if you have any physical problems like I do, and of course the massive bulk of 40+ hours every week spent at your job. And so, the reason I always say, if I win the lottery, I'll go do this, and if I win the lottery, I'll go do that, is not because of money, but because then I could quit my job. And do this kind of thing, do this thing for a living, for example. And by for a living, I mean not for a living. And that's another thing. The reason it never occurred to me to answer the other half of the question here, to ask, for donations or anything like that, is because I'm not doing this for money. I'm not doing this, because I want a job doing this per se. I'm doing this because games are awesome, and let's discuss them. That's just kind of where I'm at here. So that's always been my mentality here. But let's move on to the next question. When did I start to play games? There's two times I could give you that. One would be the earliest I remember, which would be, any of you remember the old arcade things? They were tables like this. Actually, they were lowered down on the ground, but I have to do up to so you can see it. They were just tables flat, and the actual view screen was in the table, and they were usually at like pizza parlors or bars or something like that. And you'd sit in this really uncomfortable chair, and the controls were in here like this, and you'd play Pac-Man or Centipede or something like that. That would be my earliest memories, back when I was 3. After that, it would have to be when I was 4, or no, I wasn't 4. I don't remember how old I was, actually. I was older than 4. Anyways, whenever Super Mario Brothers came out on the NES here in the States, and that would be when I really started getting into games, when I really started to enjoy that. God, I was terrible back then. I couldn't even get past. If you could picture the very first stage, real quick, of Super Mario Brothers, you go. There's the line of bricks. There's upper bricks. There's a single Goomba. And there's a pipe. I could not master the art of jumping while moving at the same time, so I never got past this pipe, and I just sat here until I died. I remember that distinctly. Anyways, that's how long I've been playing games. It's been a while. Like I said, basically my whole life. They've been a part of my life for all of it. This question has been asked 3 times in various formats. Why do you think games... what is your top 50, and why do you think those games deserve to be on that list? I don't have a top 50 per se. I mentioned before I started making a list of my top 100 until I abandoned the idea, but the list ended up being something more like a top 200 and 50-ish, I think, actually, when I ended up stopping. I could go ahead and sit down and really think about it again, but it would take a while. But I can answer the second half of that question very easily. A game that is good, as in, not objectionable. Dragon Age 2 was good. That's about at the bottom of the I'd still play it and enjoy it level. Has to be something that I enjoy, even if it bothers me, right? It has to redeem itself in some manner. But everything above that has to successively be more net gain, net positive, if you follow me. Less negatives detracting from it. And the further up you go on that list, the more that gets true, until you reach the really high up games like Dragon Age 1, for example, which is like 99% net positive, and I have almost no complaints about it whatsoever. And all those games also have another category, or another consideration rather, which is, do I consider them to be art? And for me, the biggest question of why a game is art, and therefore deserving to be on this top 50, for example, is, does it make me feel? Does it make a emotional connection with me? Do I care about the characters or the setting or something? Does it actually connect with me? Because otherwise, I don't know how better to explain this. It's like the difference between... just watching something happening. Here we go, okay. It's the difference between watching people play basketball and actually playing basketball yourself. Or insert sport here, it doesn't matter. I choose basketball because I used to be really good at it. It's the difference between watching a game, which you can still enjoy and you can still get into, but there's no direct connection there, there's no feeling there, and actually playing basketball, which, as anyone who could tell you, is completely different, And the games that actually make that connection are the ones that deserve to be in that top 50, those ones that I consider to be art. And so, I'm sorry if that was a little long, but that's my answer to that question. Let's move on here. Oh, this is just a brief thing. Someone mentioned, I said Asheron's Assassin's Creed Brotherhood is disappointing, and he thought I meant Revelations. He's absolutely correct. I did actually like Assassin's Creed Brotherhood. Revelations was the one I found disappointing. Still a good game, but not what I was hoping for. I'm still kind of tentative on Assassin's Creed 3. We'll see later this year. And then there's this whole list of games, which is essentially game question mark. What do I think about this in brief? And am I going to do a review about this? So, Alpha Protocol. I do own Alpha Protocol. I've never actually played it all the way through. I do really enjoy the game. There are some obvious bugs with the dialogues that are basically unavoidable with the sheer level of complexity within the dialogue trees. But I really like where they were going with it. I like the fact that your choices actually do visibly change what happens later. I do like the fact that the story actually diverges, as I was hoping Mass Effect 3 would, for example. That kind of thing. Very good game. As far as that goes, The rest of the game was a little lackluster, which is one of the reasons I don't consider it in, for example, my top 50 or 200 or whatever. But still a good game. Next, do I play the Total War Game series? Yes, I do. I have since they first came out. They are probably my least favorite RTSs, but when I say that, I don't mean they're bad. I just mean they're my least favorite. I still like them. They're just at the bottom of the chain, if you follow my reasoning here. That's if we count Command and Conquer in the old days, because Command and Conquer's kind of gone this way lately. But anyways, I do enjoy Total War, but I tend to get more into the campaign mode and the civilization side of the game more than I do the actual RTS battles. The RTS battles of the Total War series always kind of bore me, to be honest with you. There's plenty of tactics to be involved, don't get me wrong, but they take so long to resolve, and the battles just feel like they drag on, and it's always felt that way to me, all the way up until Shogun 2, one of the most recent editions. So, just my opinion. Nothing. It's not necessarily saying anything bad, but let's move on. Next game, Enslaved Odyssey to the West. I never picked that one up, probably never will, to be completely honest with you, because that's one of those games that raised an eyebrow. It's what I would call the bottom of the wish list game, because it's something that's interesting, but not interesting enough to be on the top of the wish list, and not with enough backing behind it in order for me to jump out and make time in my schedule to play. So I don't really have a lot to say about that. I apologize. Free Space 2, one of the best flight sims ever made. I would love to review that game sometime. I'd have to find a copy that I could play again and play it to really refresh myself on it. But that was one of my favorites. That was probably I did actually really get into TIE Fighter, and I really got into Freelancer, and I really got into Free Space 2. Those three are probably the big three of the flight sims, and I loved the heck out of them. So nothing but good things to say there. Thoughts on KOTOR? That's a lengthy one. I probably will actually review KOTOR and KOTOR 2 sometime in the future. But I will say that most people consider KOTOR to be the game that broke the Star Wars curse. And for those who don't know, Star Wars games really sucked for quite a while there. Um, but I would also still disagree with that, because there were some good Star Wars games like, Jedi Knight or Jedi Academy and TIE Fighter and X-Wing and all those. But moving along, KOTOR net result. I thought it was an excellent game. I thought it had very interesting plot, and I thought they did a very good job of making a game that felt like Star Wars without having to be to Star Wars, if you know what I mean. They weren't trying to be fanboys about it. They were fans, but not fanatics, as one of my commenters put rather eloquently. So, really good job there. Have I played Heavy Rain? No, I am well aware of it. That kind of game doesn't. This is one of those things that it doesn't interest me, but I acknowledge it. Heavy Rain, near as I can tell, is actually a really well done, really well constructed game that is actually, if you're into that type of murder mystery thing, if you're into a more down to earth, realistic gameplay, then by all means, I do actually recommend it, and it looks fantastic. It's just not the kind of thing I'm into personally. The Elvis comparison again. I don't like Elvis, but he's great. He was talented. He was skilled. I get it. So, next game, Demon's Souls, the hardest game in the world to say. Bleh. Demon's Souls. I actually don't know much about that one, to be completely honest with you. I didn't even hear about it until Yahtzee did the review about it, and then I went and actually looked up on it myself and found out a little more information. I think the idea, the concept was interesting, especially the what do they call it? The single multiplayer or something like that. The pseudo multiplayer interaction, the thing that Nintendo is going to start doing with their Pokemon games, for example, if you know about that. I thought that was an interesting idea, and I thought that was a neat concept. I just probably would not get it myself. Again, that's probably one of the bottom of the wish list games. Again, nothing against the game itself. Baldur's Gate 2, arguably one of the best RPGs. Definitely in the top 50, especially Baldur's Gate 2 specifically. Baldur's Gate 1 was good. Baldur's Gate 2 was fantastic, and I credit that fully to David Warner. For any of you who catch what I mean by that. But no, I'm kidding. He is actually one of my favorite villains of all time. Ironicus is right up there with Emperor Palpatine and Kefka. And there's one other. Hang on, I gotta think of it. Luca Blight. That would be the other one. But anyways, moving on. I do think Baldur's Gate 2 is an absolutely fantastic game, and if I could bring myself to play it again and ignore the massive irritation of dealing with second ed and dealing with the interface, I would definitely play it again. In fact, whenever they do the remake on the PC that they're supposedly going to be doing sometime in the next year or two here, I probably will end up buying it. Vampire the Masquerade. I remember playing that so vaguely. I did play it, I did enjoy it. There's actually a few games. of that series, and they were good. I That was actually what led me to get into LARPing Vampire the Masquerade, believe it or not. And it was kind of a shock because I went from a game I enjoyed to a bunch of people, and we're just not going to talk about that. That was not a pleasant experience. Moving on. Shadowrun on on the SNES specifically, I think that was one of the better, one of those hidden gem SNES games. You know, there's all the mainstream SNES games, all the ones that everyone knows about, like the Final Fantasies and the Mega Man and the Mario's were fantastic, and the Zeldas. Everyone knows about those though. There were a few hidden gems. Like Earthbound is one I consider to be one of those, and Shadowrun is another one. You know, and Ogre Battle would be another excellent example. These are games that weren't that well publicized, that weren't that well advertised, but were really good games, and I really enjoyed it. It's probably one of the best cyberpunk settings I've seen in a video game. You know, very excellently done. Skyrim. Do I like Skyrim was actually the question here. I made a point of writing out the sentence there. I love the hell out of Skyrim. I played that game into oblivion, no pun intended. I have loved the Elder Scrolls series since Daggerfall. That's when I came in, and I went back and played Arena. And excuse me, when Morrowind came out, I was blown away. Oh my god! To this day, I have trouble saying which of my Elder Scrolls is the favorite because that initial impact of Morrowind had such an effect on me, and I still think fondly of Morrowind. I still hear that music, and I just get chills. Oh, but yes, I do love Skyrim, and I will be doing a Skyrim review eventually. I think that's another question somewhere on the list, but I will be doing a Skyrim review at some point in the future. Excuse me. Okay, next. Someone asked why is Portal 2 not in my favorites, whereas Portal 1 was. Portal 2 is in my favorites as well. As I mentioned when I was blurring out that list of like 20 games, that list is huge. I like a lot of games. I love a lot of games. Portal 2 is definitely on the list, but one thing that is worthy of note is Portal 1 and Portal 2 are both fantastic games for what is essentially completely different reasons, and I could cover that in a later review. Again, this is just a summary. Portal 1 was innovative and hilarious, and really, especially on the challenge modes, really made you think. Portal 2 was engaging, and it was back to the Half-Life element. You know, Half-Life was such a success in part, or at least in majority, because it did something no one else had ever actually done before: first-person storytelling. Yes, God, and Portal 2 brings us back to that, you know, in a fantastic way, and I loved it. But let's move on. Have I ever played the Jedi Knight, Dark Forces, or Dark Academy games? Yes, I have. All of them. I did enjoy them, not a lot. You know, I wouldn't call them among my favorites, but they were actually decent games. And I did actually play with them in the Emperor's Hammer for a while. If anybody who's watching this video actually knows what this is, you know, props. I don't think the hammer really does anything anymore. But we had this whole online setup where we'd make custom maps and we'd join, you know, the Imperial Stormtroopers, and we were part of this platoon and blah blah blah, and we'd play the maps together. It was just fun. It was all in good fun, you know, completely geeky, but that's me. I've never hidden that fact, not from anyone, not since ever. Civilization 5, and will I review it? Yes, I will review Civilization 5. I do like Civilization 5 a lot, as I'll discuss a little bit in a moment, because I split up the questions a little bit too much here. Actually, I guess I could just shift down to the next question, which is, am I a fan of the Civilization series, and which do I think is best? And then there's another question after that, but I'll get to that in a moment. Yes, I'm an absolute fan of the Civ series. Civ 3 was a bit of a disappointment. Civ 4 was also a bit of a disappointment. So Civ 5 was kind of a breath of fresh air. It had a lot of bugs and a lot of coding errors. It had, in fact, a problem which made it effectively unplayable in multiplayer until they patched it. And I actually had to make a patch of my own in order to fix it. It's complicated. I'm not going to get into it. But the bottom line is, once the bugs were ironed out of the game, it was a very good game. And in answer to your second question, which do I think is best, that would actually be Civilization 2. Yes, even now, I do actually think Civilization 2 is better, and my reason for saying so is very simple. Civilization 2 had scenarios to a degree which is difficult to explain to a modern gamer. There were scenarios where you actually played, you know, the map, the ground map you're staring at was actually the space, and you could go from planet to planet, settling, wow, settling and colonizing them. It's late and I'm tired. I apologize. It's always late and I'm tired. This is another reason I want to quit my job, so I can do the reviews without being late and tired. But, you know, there was so much you could do with that, and you could set up triggers and scripts and have World War II scenarios and World War I scenarios and the Civil War, and just, oh my god, it was beautiful. It was a thing of glory. And I still, you know, when I want to play a good, you know, World War One scenario game, I go back to Civ 2 because they did it the best. Next question. Moving on. Am I looking forward to the Gods and Kings expansion to Civ 5? Yes, I am. I am buying the heck out of that as soon as it comes out. So are three of my friends actually, and we are all playing it into oblivion as soon as it comes out. Next question. This is actually a long one. I tried to summarize the question a bit for the sake of this video. Do I think BioWare should stick with standalone games rather than a canonical series? The answer is yes and no. The catch here is doing a canonical series properly requires forethought and planning. This is the most important thing, but it also requires the dedication to see it through. This is the part most people of any type, books, movies, video games, TV shows, fail on. And it's not necessarily their fault. I point to Babylon 5 as an excellent example of a story that was always supposed to be 5 seasons. For those of you who aren't aware of this event that happened, and they were told they were going to be canceled after the 4th one, and so they ended up cramming all the story into the 4th season, so the 4th season feels a little rushed, and then they were like, oh, well, you're doing great, so we're going to renew you for a 5th season, and then they had nothing, and they had to come up with stuff. And so that's the risk. That's the risk you take whenever you do a canonical series. And BioWare themselves have shown this very clearly. Let's do Dragon Age, but make it, it's intended to be part of a trilogy, and they did this with Mass Effect as well. At that point, the expectation is there. So that is a risk. But I personally do like it when they do that, because when they do it properly, they pull it off very nicely. And I point to Neverwinter Nights as the best example of that, in my opinion. Neverwinter Nights itself was a good game. Neverwinter Nights Shadows of Undertime was a great game, and Neverwinter Nights Hordes of the Underdark, which completed the tale, was fantastic. And the fact that all 3 tied in, and all 3 basically were the same overall story of the 2 main characters going through it, yes, God, yes, it was awesome. I loved it. And that is exactly why, and so I point this to this example that they can do this if they're allowed to do this. If for example, EA said, all right, go, maketh thine game, and BioWare said, yes, let us maketh thine game, or our game, rather. And we're actually allowed to do a trilogy or a duology or whatever, I think it would turn out great. The problem is interference gets in the way. So this is kind of a yes or no. I apologize for the rambling here, but let's move on. This question has been asked 5 times. Oh my god. My most asked question by far. What do I think about FF7? I talk so much about FF6, but what about FF7? Did it do something bad? Is it not one of your favorites? I personally like FF7. I would want to know what you think about it and why you prefer FF6. This was phrased in several different ways. I do like FF7. I have purchased FF7 twice total. And that may not mean much to you, but for me, rebuying a game, there has to be a good reason for it. So FF7 was worth it to me, worth the extra $10 to get on my PSP. And I do enjoy playing that game a lot. FF7 would be probably, let me think about this just really quick. Tied for 3rd, I'd say. Actually, probably in a 3-way tie for 3rd as far as my favorite of the Final Fantasies, which is really high up. And I do enjoy FF7 a lot, and I apologize if I haven't been giving it the love it truly does deserve, in my opinion, because it is a fantastic game, and it is a game that really had a lot of heart and a lot of feeling that really showed in it. And so, I apologize, guys, I'm sorry, but FF7 is awesome. And I'll go into more detail on that when I review FF7 and all of the Final Fantasies. Yes, I do plan on reviewing all 13 of them. Technically 15, but anyways. Alright, so that's the list of the games. Let's move on to the game-related questions. Get some water going on. Can't believe David hasn't called me yet. This was part of a lengthy question, which I tried to summarize as best as I could. It essentially means, will I be playing Diablo 3 at launch, and will I be willing to play with my Diablo 3 viewers at launch day? I'm not 100% sure what is meant by that, unless you mean like me playing online with several of you. That actually sounds kind of cool, to be honest with me. The only problem is the whole 4-player per map thing, which really does kind of suck when you get down to it. I forgot to mention that in my D3 review. But the second problem there is that me and Pax, Gary, and Charlie are all going to be up at midnight, ready to go, and we're probably going to be playing Diablo 3 for the next several weeks. Solid. But I have absolutely no problem sharing my thoughts on it. I have absolutely no problem, messaging people and chatting with people and all that kind of thing. So, by all means, keep messaging me about Diablo 3 and let us experience the awesomeness that I assume the game will be together. What do I think? I don't know why I put this game. Oh, I get. I know why. The question is, what do you think about space RPGs like Freelancer? I mentioned this earlier. Uh, I think space RPGs like Freelancer need to be more. I really, really, really liked Freelancer, and a lot of games like it. Privateer was another one like it, and another one I can never think of the name of. If I went to look it up, I could, but I'm not going to bother right now. That would take too long. But there are several space RPGs that really emphasize the fact that you were essentially playing your ship, and you could custom in your gear was the stuff you had equipped on your ship, and the NPCs were the other ships, and that's essentially how where it was. Other than that, it was just a 3D RPG, but it worked, and you actually controlled the combat. I love space combat. That's probably my favorite genre overall, to be completely honest with you, which is such a shame because it has just vanished in recent eras, and I really love that type of game. If I was to sit down and make games myself, one of the ones on those lists, probably the second one on the list, to be completely honest with you, would be a space RPG like Freelancer. So, next question: which game or series of games touched you the most emotionally, and why? Now that's a hard question, actually. Probably should have prepped for that one. The Final Fantasy series, of course, would be kind of easy, to be completely honest with you, and just throwing that out there. But actually, I've got three for you. I'm going to toss right out here. First would be Final Fantasy series, like I just mentioned, most especially FF6, FF4, FF7, FF9, and FF5. All of those games really genuinely made me cry, physically, literally here in real life, and not just when I was younger. But I go back and replay, and I get to certain scenes. I'm not talking about Eris's death scene. I'm sorry, that's never made me actually cry. But there are scenes of genuine emotional impact in those games, and I don't even know how to put it. They're so well done in just every aspect that there's that connection. I was talking about this with someone actually in one of my messages. There's just this emotional connection that you can have in a video game that you can't have in a book or a movie or a television show or anything like that. That helps bring that personal interest and that personal caring out. And well, that's not necessary, and while that's getting into geeky territories, the simple fact of the matter is it's true. And so that would be one of them. I'm sorry, I need to speed this up a bit. Kingdom Hearts series would be another one, and some people may laugh at that, but all I have to say is 358 over 2 days. All of the Kingdom Hearts games are bittersweet games in terms of literary style, but 358 over 2 is the exception to that. That is a tragedy. Oh, and Birth by Sleep actually is also a tragedy. Both of those are what we would call a tragic story. And it shows, and my God. Whew. I'm not going to say anything else for fear of spoilers, but anybody who knows what I'm talking about, I hope you're with me on this. The last one would be the Lufia series, or the Estbolis series, if you prefer, which is another one of those hidden gems that a lot of people haven't heard of. Lufia 2 would probably be my best one on that one specifically. That game genuinely did make me cry a lot. And all of the Lufia games have those moments of just tear-jerking. Just, oh my God, oh. And of course, I just realized I'm sort of been leaning towards tear-jerking when I realized the question was actually most emotionally in general. So it's worth noting, like, for example, FF4 had this very genuine feeling of hope and upliftingness and striving in spite of everything. And, FF5 had this feeling of freedom and lightness of heart and doing whatever is necessary because it's the right thing to do. I could go on like this. So these three series I think I would pick out as the three that really made me feel more than, most and really were noteworthy. Next question. If they remade FF10, would they remove the horrible laughing scene? Most unfortunately, I sincerely doubt they would, which is a damn shame. I actually mute the mute the TV every time I get to that scene. That's what we call a scene that doesn't add anything. It's bad because it doesn't add anything. It's not necessarily bad in its own right, even though it's irritating. But irritating can be done properly and still add to the story. That was the exact opposite way of how you're supposed to do irritating. That was just, go away. So no, they're probably not going to get rid of it. Sigh. Couple Fallout 3 questions here. What did I think of Eden's offer of adding the virus to the purifier in Fallout 3? That's kind of a tough one because on the one hand, it did feel a little bit forced. Because he basically forces you. The game will force you, unless you hack it or bug it, to take that virus. You cannot leave without taking. You cannot leave without at least being given the option of doing it. You cannot say no flat out. Which, of course, any of the characters I play would never have done that. That's absolutely ridiculous. But it's also worth noting that it's doubly horrible because even a generally evil character, in my opinion, should still not use that because it is not in their self-interest. All it's going to do is wipe out the wasteland and themselves because they are also a mutant. As indeed, if you do the FE virus and then continue the game in Broken Steel and drink several of the Aquapura, you die. So this isn't something that's just conjecture here. This is an actual fact. But regardless, I do think it was. I don't think it detracted from the game. Let me put it that way. I don't think the game was lessened by having that in there. And I really did overall enjoy the interaction with Eden, so I'm willing to give it a pass, and frankly, I have no real issues with it. Next thing. Setting-wise, do I prefer post-apocalypse or post-post-apocalypse? There is actually quite a bit to this question. I apologize for not reciting it all here, but actually I like both, and for basically different reasons. This comes down to the very next question. And I'm going to go ahead and take these questions both as a whole, because the next question is, what do I think about Fallout New Vegas versus Fallout 3? Fallout 3 being the post-apocalypse, and Fallout New Vegas being the post-post-apocalypse, when the new society is being built up, for anybody who doesn't know what I'm talking about here. There's a lot of potential with both. There's a lot that you can do with both. The post-apocalypse is always going to be more atmosphere. There's going to be more mood. There's going to be more dread, just kind of sailing on. You have more potential for survival horror, that kind of thing. You have more potential for the on-site procurement type thing that I did, as I mentioned in my Fallout 3 review. But on the other side, the post apocalyptic setting, when you're trying to rebuild, when you actually have started rebuilding society and you're moving on to the next step of actually expanding that society, has its own interests to me, because for some reason, and I am a bit of a history buff, but for some reason the idea of actually being a part of creating a society and creating a civilization has always been interesting to me, and being one of the active proponents of that is something that I can get into. So what I'm basically saying in both cases is both of them are completely separate, in my opinion, and should be considered completely separate, and I like both of them for completely separate reasons. If I was to make Fallout 4, what sort of mechanics would I add? And if it was set outside the US, where would it be? A couple things I can think of right off the top of my head. First of all, I would love to have the idea of just a little base camp. Nothing big, not like a city or anything like that, but just a little establishment, like megaton size at the most, where you recruit people, where you can, put resources into building it up, that kind of thing. I've always enjoyed that sort of thing ever since, back in Breath of Fire 2 or Suikoden. Are both excellent examples of that. Neverwinter Nights 2 did that as well with Crossroad Keep. That was the name of it. I've always gotten into that sort of thing, and just having that as this sort of little background minigame that may or may not provide bonuses, and can give you different access to different vendors and repair people and all that thing. That would be cool, I think. That would be nice to actually literally be directly involved with the establishment of society after the wasteland, even if it was just post-apocalyptic, where you're just setting up a little camp of survivors, if you follow me. Where would I set it? That's a tough one. I would not take the obvious choice and set it in China, although that would be interesting, I admit. The catch with China is doing it properly would be very, very difficult. What I think would be more interesting would be setting it in Russia, East Russia specifically, or Mongolia, any of the areas around China that would be directly affected by China. Find out what happened to them, what was going on in those nations during the final years of the wars. What were they being impacted by? We over here in the U.S. during the war invaded Canada and took over their resources and, had martial law going, all that. What was happening on the other side of the world? What was going on with them? And now that the bombs have fallen, what's happening with the Chinese government? Is there anything left of them like there is with the Enclave with us? There's all sorts of questions here, and I could go on and on and on and on. I'm going to go ahead and cut myself off here. But I think that would be fascinating to explore that from a secondary perspective, not in China, but right next to it, and, that kind of a viewpoint. What is my favorite BioWare game, and why? That's actually really difficult, because BioWare games a lot of them are listed in that art category that's way up there that I mentioned. But for completely and utterly separate reasons, I think Mass Effect 2, KOTOR, Baldur's Gate 2 are definitely, Mass Effect 1, KOTOR, and Baldur's Gate 2 are definitely really excellent games, but if I had to pick, I would probably toss back and forth between Mass Effect 2 or Dragon Age. And I know a lot of you have been asking about Mass Effect 2 and why I consider it so much better than Mass Effect 1. I will cover that whenever I get to Mass Effect 2, so That'll wait. That's complicated. I can't just answer that in one sentence, which is why I've been putting it off. But Mass Effect 2 and Dragon Age, for completely separate reasons, I'd say would be up there. If I had to pick between the two, I'd pick Dragon Age in a nutshell, easily and without any real question. But the two both, I think, do consider consideration, as do Mass Effect 1, KOTOR, and Baldur's Gate 2. Now, someone brought up the question, is the world worth saving? It's something I mentioned in my Dragon Age review. And he said, do I think the question, is this world worth saving, a question that should be put into other games, such as Mass Effect, the Elder Scrolls series, or the Fallout series? Yes, absolutely. I think if a game is doing things very well, very rightly, the writing, the setting, the voice acting, all of that, the directing, is doing its job properly, if as you're playing the hero, or the villain, but, as you're playing your character, the thought crosses your mind, is this worth it? Because if it is automatically worth it, then it feels just a little bit cheap. It lessens the victory when you save the world, as opposed to a world that you have to stop and think and say, for lack of a better term to put this, do I show mercy to these people? Do I go out of my way to help these people that I don't think should be alive? And when you say yes, and then the game lets you pull it off, it feels so much more that you actually managed it in spite of the fact that you asked that question, which is what Dragon Age did, which is one of the reasons that game was so fantastic for me, was because, yes, it was a terrible setting. Ferelden was, or Ferelden? I can't think of the name of the nation all of a sudden. The area where Dragon Age is concerned in was such a crapsack area and had so many problems, and it was so but you can still save it, and it feels so much more satisfying doing so. So yes, absolutely, that question needs to be in any serious game of any type that has any reasonable story at all. What do I think about the changes, artistically speaking, to the Darkspawn between Dragon Age 1 and Dragon Age 2? As I tried to cover briefly, in Dragon Age 1, the Darkspawn were exactly what they needed to be. I'm not going to go over that in any detail now. In Dragon Age 2, they were a gimmick. And that was one of the failings of Dragon Age 2. The Darkspawn were there because it was Dragon Age, and the Dragon Age needed to have Darkspawn. And that's it, and it felt like that. It felt like they were... one of the later Silent Hill games pulled out Pyramid Head for like one scene, and he just kind of looked at the camera. I'm sorry, here, let me just get this. Looked at the camera and then walked away. And you could tell it was just being done for the fans, so to speak. Or, you know what, I don't want to say that, because that's not necessarily a bad thing. It was being done for gimmick's sakes. It was being done because it had to be done. And it was the same thing with Dragon Age 2 with the Darkspawn. In all honesty, I personally think if they had ejected the Darkspawn from Dragon Age 2, except for that intro scene, I'll go with that. But if they had ejected the whole usage of Darkspawn and everything else except the DLC, so I guess we've got two exceptions here, I think the game would have been better for it. What do I think about the changes artistically to Flemeth between Dragon Age 1 and Dragon Age 2? This is, again, a take on how different these two games are. In Dragon Age 1, Flemeth was subtle. It was, if you're really paying attention, if you're really listening to what she's saying and how Kate Mulgrew, who was doing an excellent job, by the way, is saying her lines, it becomes very wrong, but in this incredibly quiet way that you almost can't put your finger on, And you could tell there's something else going on there. You could tell there's some trick, some subtlety to her that you just don't understand. There's some mystery there, and it was subtle, and it was quiet, and it was perfect. In Dragon Age 2, she walks up and says, "I am mysterious and also a dragon sometimes." And while it still worked, again, this isn't necessarily bashing, it was worked so much less than Dragon Age 1 did. It was so much less subtle, so I preferred the former, obviously. Excuse me. What do I think about Dragon's Dogma, game series? A game. Excuse me. I do hope that it will be a real horror game, such as Silent Hill 2, for example, rather than more of a leap-out-at-you horror like Dead Space is a good example of that. Both can work. I just personally prefer the former if I'm going to play a horror game. And if they pull off the hack-and-slash aspect like, say, Devil May Cry 3 did, that'll be fantastic. But I'm not sure how you can have those two things combined, to be completely honest with you, especially if they're gonna have the whole Monster Hunter thing going on too. So bottom line is, it's one of those ideas that sounds fantastic on paper, and we'll have to see how well they turn out. So we'll see. Am I happy about having absolutely no dislikes on my Dragon Age 2 review? Yes. Oh my god, I can't believe that. I had a dislike on my Diablo 3 review within minutes. I had no dislikes on Dragon Age 2, a game that people reviled and were just like, oh, it's horrible last year. despite the fact that I was overall saying it was a good game. It was still playable. It was still enjoyable. I'm actually very surprised by that, but very gratified. That brought a smile to my face. I didn't even realize I had no dislikes until that person asked that question. My goodness. How do I feel about Call of Duty and its effect on the industry? Modern Warfare 1 and Modern Warfare 2, and to a lesser extent some of the other Call of Duties, such as the World War one, which is Call of Duty 5, were not just excellent games, but an excellent way of doing first-person storytelling, which is something I feel people don't do enough of, partially because it's so difficult to pull off, I'm sure. But they did it beautifully. Those games are Modern Warfare 1 and Modern Warfare 2 are both considered in my art category. The way up here stuff. They really, really pulled off first-person storytelling beautifully, and I really, really, really enjoy replaying those games. Relatively frequently, especially since they're so short. Ironically. So I feel that those games overall are good. The multiplayer tends to get a little bit repetitive, especially since they just keep kind of doing the same thing over and over. It was fantastic back in Modern Warfare 1. Call of Duty 4's multiplayer was awesome. Modern Warfare 2's multiplayer was cool. Modern Warfare 3's multiplayer was terrible, and I ended up quitting out of frustration. And Black Ops is, you get the idea. It's just been kind of going downhill. What do I think about its effects on the industry? I already talked about that a bit. I do dislike the Call of Dutyization, as someone put it, in video gaming. And the problem is this. Everyone looks at Call of Duty, especially Modern Warfare 1 and 2, and they see games that were wildly successful. And so they think, we'll do that! But instead of picking up on the things that actually made those games successful, which was well-done matchmaking, interesting level design, excellent feats, perks that you get as you level for the multiplayer, the first-person story element, actually very driving and engaging story for the first person to story to be, all these things. And then they looked over here and they said, well, it's a cover-based iron sight shooter. And this is what they're copying over here, and this is what people keep pushing for. And this is the problem. This is not what you need to copy. This is what you need to copy over here. But of course, this is much easier to copy than this over here, and much cheaper. So, as with all things, I think it's no different than anything that has been done before. Remember when we just had 7 billion Doom clones, or Command & Conquer clones, that were terrible because they didn't pick up on the good elements of the games? I think I mentioned this before in one of my previous videos. But that's my thoughts on that in a nutshell. What are my opinions on our online passes as well as season passes and DLC being locked from disc to be resold back to us? Are we in the dark days of gaming when most people honestly believe this practice is fine and that this is because of used gaming, which is a lie? Ugh, sorry. I copy-pasted a lot of these because I had so many questions. Online passes is an idea I can get behind if it's worth it. For example, again, going back to what I just talked about, if Modern Warfare 1 had an online pass, I probably would have gone ahead and done that because it would have been worth it. It would have been interesting to me. But in the context here, we're talking about, for example, just Xbox Live in general, being able to use Xbox Live. Do I think that's worth it? That's an interesting question. I am automatically kind of against that. For example, if I had to pay to use Steam, I would probably be a lot less inclined to use Steam, and that kind of example. So I don't really agree with that personally for a lot of reasons that, honestly, I'm not going to get into right now because that's getting into the specifics of economy and how money works. The DLCs being locked onto the disc and resold back to us, that's just kind of cheap, in my opinion. DLCs... I had a really, really lengthy discussion about DLCs with my friend lately, and I'm not going to recant it all here, but let me summarize as best as I can. DLCs were fine when they were called something different and were something different. That was something that we used to that was something we used to refer to as an expansion. And some DLCs are still essentially expansions. Fallout 3 is a good example of a game that had actual additional content. It was relatively small, but then the price was relatively small, and that works. I would prefer a full expansion, like say Dragon Age Awakening, for example, to a pack like Witch Hunt. But as long as you keep the price variance equivalent, I'm okay with that, because you're still adding additional content and it's still good. And there's many reasons why I agree with that on paper. But the problem is so many people see DLC and they just think, well, we can just shove content out here and make you pay for it rather than giving you the full game at the retail. And people have gone way, 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 way too far with this. People have just gotten DLC happy, and it's ridiculous. And it is getting a little bit overdone. So I do not like the idea of the fact that you can get a CD that has DLCs already on it that you have to pay to unlock. That is officially crossing the line, in my opinion, for reasons that really are too complicated for me to go into right now. Are we in the dark days of gaming when people believe this practice is fine? Yes and no. There is a great deal of the silent majority going on right now, and the numbers back this up. Let me give you a direct example. Diablo 3 has been reviled and hated on every board, post, forum, anything you could see anywhere. Everyone is just bashing the heck out of that game, right? Diablo 3 is also the best-selling game of all time on Amazon right now, and on GameStop. Best-selling of all time. I think my point is already made, to be honest with you. But that's just those two. That's not counting the people who bought it directly through Blizzard, like myself. So the silent majority is something that exists right now. And it's not always silent, but my point is I don't think we're actually in the dark days as of this moment. I think that we are actually coming out of the dark days, that we have seen with a lot of things that I'm not going to go into, but the really excessive use of DLCs, the abuse of the consumer base, the emphasis on FTP or play to win, as I prefer to call it. All that was kind of a dark ages over here, and now we're seeing an upswing getting out of that with a lot of the games that are coming out soon and, soonish. So that's my opinion on that one. I'm sorry that took so long. Do I own a Wii, or do I play RPGs or any of the Wii games? Yes, I do own a Wii, actually. I do play quite a few Wii games. Several of them are considered several of my favorites. Mario Galaxy 2, for example, is an absolutely amazing game. I love the Mario Kart on it. I do enjoy Twilight Princess, although I technically call that a GameCube game, to be completely honest with you. And I do have the Monster Hunter Try on it. I actually have quite a few Wii games. It would take me a while to recite them all. But I do enjoy the Wii. I do not regret that acquisition. I do not regret any of the games I've gotten on it. It is a good system, despite what people say. The catch is you're never going to have some of the games it could have because of the hardware concerns. FF13 could have never come out on the Wii because it's the Wii. But you can still do a lot with it. And so I don't think it needs to be derided simply because of the fact that it's a kiddie system, when in fact calling it a kiddie system is like calling any video game system a kiddie system. It doesn't work that way. There are just as many kiddie games on the Xbox as there are on the Wii. The Wii ones just tend to sell better. And I don't mean that as a dig as Xbox, by the way. I apologize if I sounded derisive there. It's actually more to do with the fact that the Wii is more publicized and more accessible as a kids game, or a kids console. So it tends to sell better, because that's what everybody knows, right? It's the Wii. Security concern. Oh my goodness. This is actually going to be a long question, so I apologize. This was a long post which essentially summarized the question, what do I think of the security concerns of more recent PC games and how risky it's getting to do PC games and blah, blah, blah. There are two sides to the story, technically three, actually. On the one side over here, we have the developers who are worried about the amount of money they're losing in sales and have a problem. That problem is called... Well, actually, I don't remember the specific economic term at the top of my head, but what it is the result of inflation. Any corporation, I don't know if you know this, any corporation is basically required by charter, but is required because that's the way things work, to not just make profit every year, but to have increasing profit every year. And that is how a company is successful, right? And it has to account for inflation in that fact, which is why I mentioned it as a result of inflation. That mentality means that companies especially for the last several years, have been getting tighter and tighter on how they deal with games, and it's getting to the point where we're at the penny pinching, with the whole used game thing, and how we don't want, we're losing sales on used game, blah, blah, blah. Why do you care? You care because you're trying to make more money, and it's getting harder to do, right? So they've been going after things that otherwise they might not have cared about, like piracy. Now, I do admit piracy is a valid concern. It is also worth noting that most people that pirate would not be sales to begin with. And I do stress the most. There are still some who might buy it anyways, but most pirate because they don't want to pay for the game, and they're not going to, even if they don't pirate. So I'm of two minds on this, but I do actually see where the companies are going. I do actually have a lot of sympathy for the people who are in charge of making those decisions. On the other side here, we have the pirates, which, as I said, for the most part consists of people who just want to play the game and don't want to pay for it. There are also people who do so for more legitimate concerns. For example, a game that has a DRM that is significantly irritating, that they actually can't play it after they have purchased it legitimately, so they return it, go pirate it, the copy that doesn't have the DRM, and there you go. Ubisoft. Sorry. Um, and that's one possibility. There's also the people who want to try a game because people we have to take things on such faith these days, and it's harder. It's getting harder and harder to do because the whole situation seems to be escalating with regards to negativity in video gaming, and so we want to try the game before we buy it. And I know someone personally who does this. Well, I'm not going to name any names, of course, but he would, download a game and play it for a bit, and if he liked it, he would uninstall, go buy it, and then actually play it, because essentially what he was doing was playing a demo. And in all honesty, I think companies could save themselves at least some worries on this issue if they actually released demos that were real demos rather than, hey, flashy demos. Please buy our game demos. And then, of course, as I said, there's three sides, and this is the most important one of all about this issue. This is what this really boils down to. Us, right here in the middle. We are the people who suffer for the conflict between these two sides. And we are the majority, the silent majority here. We're talking like 90, 95 percentile here, in between the companies and the people who pirate and steal. This massive bundle in the middle is the one who is suffering for the actions of these two parties and this escalating war that has been going on for quite a few years at this point. And I personally don't see any real option for fixing this problem because Diablo 3 is an excellent example. The whole always online thing. Now, granted, that's for other reasons as well, as I discussed in my Diablo 3 review. But StarCraft 2, then, if you prefer the mostly online thing, because they needed to not have any problems with the DRM issue. And Steam is another excellent example of a DRM system. And I'm sorry. I'm going to actually go ahead and cut myself off here because if I really went off on this, it would take me a lot longer, and it's already 3:20, and I need to get on with this. So I apologize for answering this in summary, but I think the real problem here is that the people in the middle are the ones suffering for the corporates and the thieves. For whatever reason, good or bad, that the thieves are stealing, and for whatever reason, good or bad, that these people want their money. Both sides have valid complaints. Both sides just have plain old people who are trying to do whatever they're trying to do. I'm not trying to vilify or glorify either side. The problem is the people in the middle are suffering for it. So I don't see a solution, to be completely honest with you, unless the corporate people stop penny pinching, to be honest with you. But let's move on here. Oh, where was I? Goodness, that was a long one. What is my opinion on game walkthroughs, in particular for RPGs? Do I think they take away some of the point or fun of the game? No, not at all. And my reason for that is twofold. One, they are completely optional. And speaking personally, I almost never, in fact, very, very, very rarely do I pull up a walkthrough until I've already played through a game at least once. I will play through it once, and then usually when I do my second playthrough or my no-really playthrough, I will use a walkthrough to make sure I don't miss anything. And I like being able to have that concept of I don't want to miss anything because I don't think of everything when I'm playing a game. I'm just enjoying myself and doing my thing. I'm not like that. So I don't see anything wrong with that as long as it's used in moderation. Second question related to that: what do I think about game wikis? Do I think PVX, for example, which is a thing for Guild Wars if you're not aware of it, was a good or a bad thing? Again, for the exact same reasons, I think it's a good thing. In fact, I think it's a fantastic thing. I think having an information source for a MMO that is well supplied and well documented by by the players or by the MMO developers either is more or less necessary to a successful MMO. Asheron's Call did this. EverQuest did this. Excuse me. World of Warcraft did this like 3 times over. 5 times over, actually, if you want to get into it. But, just to name one example, Wowhead is an excellent source of information. Wowpedia is an excellent source of information. And Guild Wars, of course, with the Guild Wars officially endorsed wiki, by the way. The company ArenaNet actually does personally endorse that wiki and does help maintain it to an extent. I think that's a good thing because it's an option, and if you need to know the info, if you don't have the answer, if you don't know what the exact math is, or you don't know exactly where this item drops, or you don't know exactly where this spot is, or you don't, whatever, you can go look it up. But you don't have to. You don't have to follow down to the lines. But again, and the choice of freedom and options here. If you want to just follow by the lines and follow the rulebook, you can. So I'm with it. I'm completely in support of that. Oh, goodness. What do we got here? Let's scroll down a little bit. On to the next page. Okay. Do I think there's a chance that full party creation by default or option will be back in future AAA RPGs? That's actually a pretty good question. And for those of you who don't really know what that's talking about, back in, say, Baldur's Gate 2, for example, you could make your one party member and then, tag along with all the people, the NPCs basically, the party members that are designed for the game. Or you could make an entire party entirely of your own people and then just play with those. And I liked that option a lot. I did actually usually end up using the NPCs just because I like the story and I like the character development. But the option existing was really nice, and as you're probably aware, very few games nowadays do that. I do think that will probably come back at some point or another. I don't know to what extent. I would like to see that come back personally. So that would be nice, but it would probably be optional, just like it was back then. I sincerely doubt that's going to be required in any modern RPGs. Although I will point out that there was an RPG that did require that. It was actually an expansion, Storms of Zephyrs, to Neverwinter Nights 2. That's not that recent. That's a few years ago. But you did have to make your party completely of your own people. There were no people who would join you on the thing. So, it's a possibility. Do I think Dragon Age 3 will be impacted by the fact that its writing team was moved to Save Tor? Yeah. Now, it is worth noting that all the good writers, especially Guider himself, did go to Tor. Now that Tor is out and the content is planned for the next 8 patches, I believe, those people are now working on Dragon Age 3, so it is actually really possible that while it might have impacted it in some negative fashion, they will still be able to recover and still make a good story, especially since Guider himself, Gator? I really don't know how to pronounce his name, which is a shame because I really have a lot of respect for the guy. The lead writer, the good writer, is back on the Dragon Age 3 team, and he is involved with Dragon Age 3 actively as of now. So, props, awesome. I'm really looking forward to that. So I don't think it's going to be a particularly horrible thing. Someone asked me about, oh goodness, I just copy pasted this, didn't I? A question about Max Payne 3. Gentleman was excited about the game. He's been a fan since Max Payne 1, but he's playing the games on the PC. He doesn't own a console. He wants to know my opinions regarding system requirements for Max Payne 3. Now, and because Rockstar ports are usually awful, and that is actually very true. One of the best examples of that I can come up with right now is Grand Theft Auto 4, which is a good game. I enjoy. I have it on the PC. Back when I got the CD version, the initial port, I should call it, I had to go and download a custom hack of the EXE in order to get it to run. And then I had to jump hoops through customizing my video card in a very specific manner to get it to not have nothing rendered. It wasn't rendering terrain, if you know what that means. So, it was just terrible. It was literally unplayable. And that is not the first time they've had that problem. But there is hope, because the Steam version and the more modern versions have been patched and been fixed. It does take them a while to get there, to the point where the game is actually playable on a PC. Grand Theft Auto San Andreas is a great example of that. It took a while for that game to really be playable on the PC, but once they did, it was fully playable. It had no real issues other than the same bugs, that the PS2 version did. So I do fully recommend you go ahead and get it on PC and just wait. Actually, I probably recommend you get it used at that point and just wait for them to patch it a few times, because at that point it'll be awesome. Next thing, what do I think about limited party members? What I mean is when you get more than 2 or 3, you have to start leaving some behind. Sometimes it makes sense, but I'd love to have all, like that camp ambush scene in Dragon Age Origins. I do actually personally like the idea of large party members, especially since, again, going back to Baldur's Gate 2, that's what used to happen. You had a party of, I think, 6, something like that, big old party, and even then, you still had to leave some NPCs behind because there were a lot of people who could join your party. But I do actually... It's not that I disagree per se. I get why there's only the 2 party members in Mass Effect. I get why there's only the 3 in the Dragon Age. I just wish there was more, if you follow me. I think it would be better served if we had more than just the default 3 or 4 party teams that seem to have just kind of become the norm these days. That's just my opinion, but I did actually enjoy having a squad, my own little group, and there's 2 big reasons for that. One is, of course, the obvious tactical advantages, but 2, and more importantly, Mass Effect is the biggest example here. I always felt really bad leaving behind anyone on this ship, especially in Mass Effect 2. and I guess I should say in Mass Effect 1 as well, because I liked my party members. So I rotated frequently because I wanted to see, I wanted everyone to be involved in the adventure. I wanted everyone to have a say in saving the galaxy. But if I could just bring them all, then we're all here. We're all part of this. We're all saving the galaxy. And that way, another thing, and this is a little thing, I'll admit, but there's little flavor texts that people will say. They'll have just little lines as you walk by a booth or you see an NPC over there, and they'll just be like, oh, blah, 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 blah. It would be nice to actually get all of those rather than just one or two and then have to look the rest up on the wiki or something like that. Another good reason for wikis. But obviously there are some instances where that doesn't work, where you want to have limited party members for the sake of a specific scene or a specific section of a story, and that's fine. I'm with that. It's just I personally would really like to go back to the days of large parties for these three reasons. What are my opinions on platforms such as Steam and Origins? And what are my predictions and wishes for the future of gaming? Oh my goodness, that's a big one. I think Steam is I am fully 100% in favor of Steam. Valve has only made one mistake that I'm aware of, like, ever. Two mistakes. I'm sorry, two mistakes that they've ever made ever. And Steam was a fantastic thing. I remember when Steam was actually a joke. I don't know how many people remember when Steam came out, and it was so terrible and so awful and so poorly done. But I give them props because what they did was fixed it. And I said, oh, okay, let's fix this. And they fixed it, and they fixed it, And now Steam, I am fully in favor of Steam. I support, I endorse, I encourage people to use Steam for both buying and for developing. Because it's a fantastic idea. It's an excellent way for people who don't have the ability to get into a publisher's pocket and get their game out there to get their game out there without just skipping the publisher step, using Steam as the distributor. And Steam is usually very fair about that, very fair about the way they distribute the money and have to deal with the royalties and all that sort of thing. So definitely love Steam. I use Steam a lot. I generally prefer to buy a game on Steam if I have the choice, especially because I love digital distribution. Always have, really. Part of that is because I've always had access to a good internet connection, especially here at work, where I have an OC12 line, if you know what that means. If you do, you're probably like, oh my god, he has an OC12? Yeah, I can download very, very quickly. Literally, I'm limited more by my router, or rather my network card on my laptop than I am anything else. But I love the ability to be wherever and log into Steam on whatever device and say, I want to play that game, and let me start downloading, please. And I'm really in favor of that. Origins I'm less in favor of, but that's just because it's EA, and I disagree with the reason why they made Origins. That's a whole complicated thing I'm not even going to get into. EA's reasons for that was really dumb. Moving on. Predictions and wishes for the future of gaming. Well, I want holodecks. I'm just kidding. That would be terrible. It would be awesome, but it would also be terrible at the exact same time. I wish gaming continues to be good, if you know what I mean. I wish there's to still be even 1 to 5 games that come out in a year or 2 or 3 that still have that feeling to them, that still have that heart to them, that still have that passion to them. I still want there to be games that I can call art. And to date, I haven't really been disappointed on this. A lot of people I know have been talking about the downfall of gaming and how it's just been going downhill over the years, and the SNES was the golden era and all that stuff. And while I agree that the SNES era was probably the golden era of gaming to date, I don't think gaming has really gone downhill per se. I think every year there's still a game that comes out that I consider a work of art. I could point to last year as an excellent example. Skyrim. Boom, right there. I don't even remember what other games came out last year. There were quite a few, actually. But Skyrim is as far as I have to go. Even one excellent game like that deserves the recognition and means that gaming is still going on the right path, at least in part. And that's what I want to see continue. Yes, there's no avoiding the fact that there's still going to be crap. Yes, there's no avoiding the fact that there's still going to be the bulk, which isn't necessarily bad, it's just there. But I still want those gems to surface, and I still want to be able to enjoy them in the future. And I want other people to enjoy them in the future. Oh my goodness. Any franchises I wish they would bring back? Yes, Secret of Mana. My God, bring that game back. I'm sorry. I actually get genuinely upset about this. They made an iPhone proper remake. I've talked about proper remakes before, so I'm not going to talk about that again. But they made a proper remake of Secret of Mana, and they put it on the damn iPhone instead of a real gaming console. And so and Seiken Densetsu 3, which is Secret of Mana 2, has never come out in the States. I've only played it because I was part of the team that was helping translate it way, way back. And, why, guys? That was a fantastic series. Why did this Sword of Mana series just kind of go away? I'm sorry. I'm going to let this go. Let's move on. What do I think about EA releasing an indie bundle on Steam? I actually laughed a lot when I saw that, an indie bundle from Steam. Never mind the fact that, anything by EA, or I'm sorry, indie bundle by EA. Anything by EA by definition is not indie. Let's ignore that for a moment. No, really. Let's ignore that for a moment. Let's not get into that whole discussion. What is more important is the fact that what made that so funny was it was like EA was trying so desperately to get into the indie market. And so EA did what EA always did. They said, okay, okay, you and you and you over here and you. Okay, you guys have all made successful indie games. We have purchased you now. You are now EA Games. Hey, we have EA indie games now. Check it out. That's exactly what they did, and that just made me laugh. That was so Me Too that it was hilarious. So I don't have anything else to say about that. Morrowind, Oblivion, Skyrim, and Fallout 3. How do I feel these games compare to each other? That's an interesting question. As I've discussed previously, an Elder Scrolls game, and yes, I include Fallout 3 in that list. I guess I could say a Bethesda game, is always noticeable and recognizable as a Bethesda game. I think taking it into a shooting environment was a natural step, and it worked really well with that first-person shooting kind of thing in Fallout 3. I think that worked fantastically. I think that Morrowind, Oblivion, and Skyrim are all amazing games that I more or less refuse to compare in direct competition with each other, but rather in consideration for how much the series has grown over time and changed and moved and evolved, and you could still see the love of the setting and the characters and the writing and the setting, my god. All of these games create worlds. They don't create games, they create worlds. I remember when I was describing to a friend of mine who had never touched an Elder Scrolls Oblivion, and he was like, okay, well, I'm going to take off a weekend and go play Oblivion. And I just started laughing, and he's like, what? And I was like, okay, let me explain this in one sentence. Oblivion isn't a game, it's a world. And at the end of that weekend, when he had to go back to work, he came to me and he just looked at me and he was like, you were right. So, I'm not going to compare these in direct contrast. So I'm sorry I'm not quite answering your question, but I'm not 100% sure what you're going for here. Regardless, I do think Bethesda games are the one company that has never, ever, ever disappointed me. Not once, not ever. Any game that has actually been made by Bethesda has been fantastic. And that'll lead into something else, which I'll talk about later when we get to the MMO section. I'm not even to the MMO section. Oh my goodness. Okay, next question. Am I going to review the Command & Conquer games? And what do I think about BioWare doing CNC Generals 2? I could review the Command & Conquer's game. I can add those to the requested list. I played them extensively. They were some of my favorite RTSs back in the day, and I did enjoy the Red Alert series. I've enjoyed the Red Alert series into the modern era. I liked Red Alert 3. I thought it was fun. I thought it was a nice little, they took what they had going in Red Alert 2 and they just kind of ran with it, and I liked that. I liked the fact that it was just, attacking people with bears with the Russian symbol on them, and cannons that shoot people. Yes, God, yes, it was awesome. So I will probably be doing that. What I think about BioWare of all people doing CNC Generals 2, I don't even know what to say to that. I actually liked CNC Generals a little bit, and I stress a little bit. That was one of those good games. It's at the bottom of the list. Still enjoyable, but it didn't really catch me. Zero Hour was, and so we'll see. If they do actually bring some kind of RPG elements to it, that would be interesting. What I am curious most to see is if there will be a story, because as we all know, Generals and Zero Hour basically didn't have a story so much as a setting, a set piece that you played within. So we'll see. I'm not holding my breath. Let's just put it that way. What do I think about the Baldur's Gate series? I think it's fantastic. Yes, it is one of my favorite games, and why? It's because it's freaking awesome. I mean, shoot. I don't even know how to summarize that. It was excellent writing. It was excellent voice acting. Voice acting in a PC game, that was also kind of weird at the time. Still a fairly new idea. It was the graphics were just well enough done for the time that you had some idea what you were doing. The interface was passable. I'm sorry. I'm losing my sense of concentration. But overall, yes, Baldur's Gate 2 was the Baldur's Gate series was one of my favorite game series, and I am actually looking forward to the high-def remakes that they're doing. Hopefully they'll be real remakes rather than just ports. We'll see. But I am looking forward to them one way or another. Scroll down. Okay, this is the MMO section. I'm sure you've heard about Bethesda's plan to make an Elder Scrolls MMO. While I can't stand MMOs myself, how do you feel about this new direction of the company? Do you think it will be successful and last? This is an interesting question because speaking as someone who has been in MMO since before the term MMO existed, I I have a very interesting opinion preference perspective on MMOs. I've played just about all of them too. I've been in like every beta. You name it, I've been in a beta. My favorite example to card out is Shattered Galaxy, which most people have never heard of. I was in that one's beta. I was in everything's beta, and I played a lot of them after the beta. And usually, especially in this era and the era we just passed, the post WoW era and the I call it the garbage era. To be completely honest with you, the current era of MMOs, the garbage era, because there's so many pay-to-win games, there's so many browser games that just are kind of garbage, And occasionally you'll find a good game there. I'll admit that, but 90% of it or 80% of it or whatever is just. Ugh. In this era, when a company announces we're making a blah MMO, my first reaction is, ugh, no. Especially if it's a series I like. They're doing a Farscape MMO. And my first reaction to that was, ugh. And then I read more about it and learned more about it, and I found out that my reaction was more like, ugh. Keeping in mind, Farscape's one of my favorite shows. I'm not enthused about that. But here's the catch. Bethesda has not once, in the history of their gaming career, let me down. Not even a little. They have not even disappointed me. They have never made a good game. They have only ever made fantastic games, or better. I am willing to give them the benefit of the doubt here, and it's also worth noting that this is not something that they are just kind of springing on us. This is something they have been planning for a while. Just to give you one example of that, anybody who knows a little bit about Skyrim's code and how to get into that will know the fact that Skyrim actually has multiplayer coding in it, already ready to go, which is something you don't just put in by accident. They were already testing it. They were already getting ready for that. And on top of that, this also raises an interesting point. As a lot of people are aware, the rest of Tamriel is actually rendered in Skyrim for basically no reason, except for the fact that this MMO takes place in all of Tamriel. Now, obviously, it's going to be Tamriel of the previous era. I think it's 2,000 years previous. I don't remember exactly. So, whatever. But my point is, this is not something they're doing lightly. This is not something they're rushing in, which is usually the first bad sign for an MMO. I am enthused. I am excited. It will probably be good, to be completely honest, and I probably will be buying it. Do I still play Lord of the Rings Online? If so, what are my impressions of the current end-game content? I do think they're doing the right direction with raids, or I should say raid, actually, singular. But unfortunately, I think it's a little too late. They've already lost so much of their consumer base that I'm not sure many of the people who are hardcore raiders or into that kind of thing, into that type of challenge and raiding are still left, and will still actually have an interest in playing, so, that's a problem in its own right. But I do like the way they've been taking the story. I do like the way they've been taking the book quests. The zone quests have been tedious, and I'm not going to say that, actually, because the zone quests have either been tedious and boring, maybe about 40% of them. The other 60% have actually been pretty cool, but interesting, and actually following a common thread of a story, which I really like. And they are bringing the story out more to the player. They are doing layering a little bit poorly, I think. Let's not go into that discussion. Bottom line, how I play Lord of the Rings Online now is how I used to play Guild Wars. Whenever I feel like it, basically, because I just kind of log in whenever there's a new book quest, or whenever one of my friends says, hey, let's go do blah, and I log in for a few days and I play it, and then I let it go again. But I do leave it installed for that reason, and I do still recommend it to someone who's never played the game. It is actually still a good MMO. I just wish they hadn't gone the free-to-play route. What is my take on Leroy Jenkins, and have I ever played with the Leroy? Now, this is a two-part question in more ways than one. Leroy Jenkins was obviously a joke, for anybody who doesn't know that. It was staged. And so, have I ever played with someone who is joking around and does something like that just for fun, even if it results in a wipe? Yes, I have. I've actually been that person before. And that's a tricky thing. You can't just do that and think it'll automatically be funny. You have to do that. You've been wiping on Lich King for an hour and a half, and you're irritated and you're tired. Everyone's tired. And so the Lich King shows up, and you're like, all right, Leroy! And you have to say it on vent. You have to say it. Leroy! And you charge up and taunt him and have him come through and just wipe out the group in one hit. And if you pull it off right, and if you're playing with friends who will get the joke and will be with you on the concept and what you're trying to get across, they'll just start laughing. And it's a nice mood breaker, if you know what I mean. But that's literally like a 1 in 100 chance time, so you can't do that all the time. Consequently, the too many people think you can do that all the time. Again, moderation being the key here. And those kind of people I have grouped with, unfortunately, and those people need to go away, or at least learn moderation. Learn to do it once every 100 times, not once every 3, please. Next question. Will I be doing a modern look at Asheron's Call sometime in the future? Yes, actually, I will. I would like to do a 2012 look at Asheron's Call. I don't know when. Obviously sometime this year, based on the idea. But I would love to look at, with the new changes they made, the dual wielding, the different take on the story. We will have been ramping up the Durain thing. I'm very excited about where that's going to go. And I'll look at it. I'm actually going to re-roll a completely new character with no support base. Obviously, I have my level 250 lying around. 250s actually. But I'm just going to make a new character and roll it fresh and see how it goes and see how it works these days and, give it a modern perspective. Let's see. What are my thoughts on the Secret World? I almost hate to be honest sometimes because people ask me about some games and I just kind of like, Secret World is made from the people who made Age of Conan and Anarchy Online. Those are two of the MMOs. I have played both, and I didn't like either of them. I won't go so far as to say I actively disliked them. I didn't think they were terrible like a few other MMOs I can name, which I'm not going to. But they were not good. They weren't even, nothing about them appealed to me at all. To me. This is always my opinion. And I admit that Secret World has some interesting ideas. It's got kind of a Second Life vibe going on. But there are too many other things coming out right now for me to give something a chance, especially given their history, so shrug. What are my opinion on Borderlands, and am I excited about the sequel coming out this fall? Borderlands is another one of those games that I never got on board with, purely because of my friends. Not to say they disliked it, it's more like none of my friends play it, and Borderlands is one of those games that really should be played with a friend, people you actually know. And so, if I did have several friends who played Borderlands, I'd be all on board with that. I'd probably have stopped playing it by now, but you get my point. And I would be excited about the Borderlands 2 sequel, or whatever you want to call it, coming out soon. For example, Torchlight is another one of those games that I can only get into if my friends got into it, and my friends did get into Torchlight, so we kind of played Torchlight. Now you're saying, well, that's not multiplayer. No, you're right, it's not. Torchlight 2 is going to be multiplayer, and we're buying that. In fact, several of my friends have already bought that on Steam, so shrug. Moving on. Have I played City of Heroes? Will I do a review of it? I have played City of Heroes, not that much. Oh, as I tried to explain in one of my MMO reviews, I don't remember which, I don't like to do a review of an MMO that I can't say for an assurance I have played enough to give it a truly fair review. This is one of the reasons I took down several of my reviews, among other reasons. And because I was just kind of disappointed with those reviews, and frankly, they serve no purpose here anymore. But City of Heroes I didn't play nearly enough to review, not fairly. It had some very interesting concepts. It had a massive character creation, which was awesome. It had interesting story arcs, and an interesting transportation system is what I think I'm going to call that. But that's basically all I can really say to it. Anything else would just be conjecture, especially since it's been too long since I've really played it. Did I ever play Champions Online? Yes, I played the beta of that, of course. I played the beta of all of these that I'm mentioning. And I did play it a little bit when it was first released. They did have some very interesting ideas in Champions Online, I'll admit that. The whole auto-grouping thing for group quests, where just by being near the area you help contribute to the credit and all that. That was actually a good idea. I liked that. And I thought that was well implemented. But unfortunately, that's basically the only thing I have good to say about it. One of my biggest complaints about Champions Online was the fact that while you could be a fire or an ice or a mutant or a mage or whatever, ultimately all of those didn't feel any different at all. It is still possible to make something that is only a cosmetic change and not an actual change and still feel different. But Champions Online went too far with the, cosmetic aspect of that, and it literally just felt like I was a guy no matter what I did and no matter how I looked, and it just kind of it didn't jump out at me. Interesting graphic style, though. I'll actually give them props for that. I know you play a lot of MMOs, so I was wondering, what do you have any thoughts of RuneScape? RuneScape is a free browser game, for anybody who's not aware of it. I have played it, of course. I never got into it personally, partially because it's a browser game and doesn't have the kind of depth that I need for a game to really sink my teeth into. As far as MMOs go, at least I should say. But also partially because something about it just kind of put me off. And I don't really have... I'm unfortunately cannot explain this distinctly, so forgive me. But something about the game just felt lacking. And obviously it's a browser game that's free, so that's like complaining that a banana is not a steak. But you get my point. That simple fact means I personally will not get into it. However, I do know several friends who basically don't have the ability to get into an MMO fully or properly, like World of Warcraft or Guild Wars 2 or whatever, and don't have the capacity to really dedicate themselves to something. So a browser game like that they can just play idly and whenever is actually a good idea. So I am still in favor of that, and I still endorse RuneScape if you're someone who has basically no free time and just wants something casually going on in the background. Oh, have I ever played DC Universe Online? Yes, I have. That was in the beta. I feel like I'm a broken record here. DCU Online, though, I actually have nothing really good to say about it. I hate to say that. I thought the initial concept really interested me. Not the heroes thing, because it's been done before. I just mentioned two games that did that before as an MMO. What was interesting is they were going to make it a part of canon. They were going to make it a part of the actual continuity of DC, which was interesting. And I was like, okay, that could be cool. And then they made all of the mistakes that modern MMOs make, and nothing was actually that interesting about it. And one of the biggest mistakes they made, in my personal opinion, and Yahtzee mentioned this as well, is they give you the ability to fly right off the bat. And something is taken away when you are. I mentioned this in my Diablo 3 review. When the boundary here between being overpowered and too weak, and you want to get the sweet spot in the middle, right? That goes for transportation in a game, and well, especially in an MMO. You don't want it to be too slow. That's irritating, but you don't want it to be too fast because at that point you no longer appreciate what you're dealing with. So you have to hit this middle ground here, and DCU Online went over here with that, and that really detracted it from me for me. And of course, the other problem was that in DCU Online, you're basically playing a mimic. You're a fanboy. Actually, you're playing a I want to be just like blah, and you actually choose one of the actual existing superheroes to be as your mentor or model or whatever they actually called it. I don't remember right now. And the whole impression was just that you aren't actually one of the heroes, but we'll humor you. You can go and beat up some bad guys. It'll be fun. Didn't catch me at all. I'm getting a PlayStation 3 soon, and I've heard Final Fantasy 14 is coming out for it. Should I get it? No, don't get FF14. No. Let me explain why very briefly. I played FF14 in the beta. I played FF14 when it came out. It was terrible. It was a terrible MMO, arguably one of the worst MMOs I've ever played. Had a lot of problems with it. I'm not going into it in detail. But says a lot when a gaming company actually says, okay, hang on, mulligan. And that's what they did. They pulled a mulligan, and they said, all right, we're going to go ahead and do this again, and FF14 is going to come out again, and it will be better. Guys, it can work that way ideally, but it generally doesn't, especially when you screw up that badly to start. So at this point, they have to work themselves up from the bottom of the barrel in order to make that game justifiable, which is still possible, I'll admit. But I would generally not recommend picking up 14, especially not without really looking into it first. Have I ever played EVE Online? I actually had an EVE Online review up here at one point, and I took it down because it was a... Did I actually take that one? I actually don't remember if I took that one out. But the point is that I did have an EVE Online review up here at one point in time, and it was a game that I personally didn't get into, but I found absolutely fascinating. It was one of those, I recognize the game for its merits and for its excellence, even though I personally don't get into it, one of those situations. And so I really did want to like it more than I did, and that's all I'm going to say on the matter at this point. Now I need a drink if you'll excuse me. My goodness, what are we up to here? Oh my goodness, this is taking so long. I am so sorry. Mass Effect questions. Do I think some of the characters from Mass Effect 2 should have been allowed in the party in Mass Effect 3? Yes. I think that what they did the right task with some of them. Let's see. Let's go with Mordin, Tali, Legion, and Rex. And I think that's it. Those characters, I agree, should not have actually been able to join the party because of the various story implications and the way they were presented. I think that was well done. Yes, I know Tali does join your party, but you get my point. She joins the party later because yada yada yada. However, everyone else, I think, should have at least had an opportunity to join your party temporarily. at bare minimum. Especially Jacob. That was so poorly handled, in my opinion. I feel really bad for people who romance Jacob, and he just shows up and cheated on you with some random chick that you never heard of before. I think that was poorly handled. I think more Mass Effect 2 characters should have been playable in 3. Why do I dislike James Vega? This is actually kind of hard to explain because this is actually asked twice. James Vega uh, was an excellent depiction of a standard military grunt. You know, an everyman, an infantry. There we go. I think grunt is actually an example, good example. I don't mean that as an insult, by the way. I mean that as a sign of respect, actually, in all in total honesty. You know, he was an excellent example of that. That kind of person should not be a member of the party. He should have been an NPC who maybe was on the ship or maybe was part of the missions, or in a similar vein to say Ashley Williams or the chick you have in Mass Effect 3. I can't even think of her name right now. The British chick, or Anderson is is a good example there, although he's on the upper end. But you get the idea. Someone who's not actually part of the party, but still relevant to the plot. I could have gone with that. James Vega joining the group that consists of Garrus, Tali, Liara, and Shepard was just ludicrous and bothered me on the face of that. But on top of that was also the fact that I personally, the real person here, don't get along with that mentality, the mindset of someone who is an infantryman, who is a grunt. And so while I'd have a great deal of respect for those sort of people in real life as well, I try to avoid them because I simply don't get along with them. And so Vega always kind of rubbed me wrong, if you follow me here. So that's one of the reasons he was always a shiprat for me. Next question, Mass Effect. What do I think about the believability of bi or homosexuality in recent BioWare games? This is actually tied in with another question, which I was just asked right before I started doing this video, so I put that right at the end. I'm going to go ahead and tie it into this one here. In fact, let's just go ahead and scroll down. Where was that one? What the question specifically asked, there was actually quite a bit of a write-up for this, and I do apologize for summarizing it down to this simple sentence. What gay character do I think they pulled off, or what homosexual character do I think they pulled off in the best way, and which one in the worst way? This is related to this because I think Cortez in Mass Effect 3 was actually fairly well done, and I will explain why very simply. Cortez was not... Cortez being homosexual was as much a part of his character as Cisco being black in Deep Space Nine was part of his character. In other words, it basically wasn't, if you follow what I'm saying. It wasn't emphasized, it wasn't overstated, it wasn't, hey, look at me! It was just, this is who he is, and it comes up occasionally in backstory, maybe, sometimes, And it was handled very well, I thought. It was handled just like he was another person. The worst example of this, I think, would be Anders over in Dragon Age 2, and this, this ties into the Rosen question of believability of it. Anders was done horribly. It was everything wrong you could possibly do about making a character like that. I don't know if they were going for the controversy factor or the laziness factor, but my goodness. And I think it's not particularly believable when you have a character, or indeed many characters that are bisexual, when their character doesn't really support that, if you follow me. For example, Isabella in Dragon Age 1 and 2 both, I completely believe that. Don't even have a hesitation. And I'm not saying that as a mean thing. I'm not saying that as a thing against her character. This is important. I'm not judging anyone. What I am saying is that from her personality, I could see that fitting rather well, if you follow me. Anders, no. Let's see, what's another actually good example? I'm sorry, I'm really tired. I can't actually think of another example off the top of my head, so I'm just going to go ahead and skip past this. But my point is, doing it believably and doing it understated, doing it where it's what they are, and oh well, move on. It's like, okay, doing it properly is like saying Samus Aran is a woman. Yeah. Okay, and that really should be the response. Saying, Cortez is gay should be met with the response of, okay, and? Because it should never be in your face, it should never be flaunted, it should never be just shoved up there and be like, hey, look at this. Because that's just basically going for shock value at that point. And people in real life do this too. I have several friends who are homosexual or bisexual, and it's a part of their character in the same sense the fact that I happen to have white skin is a part of my character. In other words, it isn't. It has nothing to do with me. It's just something that happens to be there, if you follow me. And that's why I think it should be done. Just my opinion, of course. What? This I actually got two questions right in a row. What is my most favorite character other than Shepard in all of the Mass Effect series and why? And what is my most favorite character in Mass Effect series and why? This is actually gonna. I'm gonna go ahead and answer this together because this is effectively the same answer. It's a very close tie between Tali and Garrus for what amounts to completely different reasons. Tali, I love Tali. I love the heck out of Tali. She is awesome. She's intelligent, she's witty, she's interesting, she has a developed backstory, she has a lot of personality to her, has just enough flair of innocence about her. Even in Mass Effect 3, she has depth to her. I love her. Garrus, everything I just said, he is awesome. He is awesomeness personified. He is a badass done properly. He is strong-willed. He believes very strongly in the concept of good over order. Unlike most Turians, he's very loyal. He's very friendly. He has lots of depth, lots of layers to him. Blah 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 blah. Both excellent characters, both very well developed characters, and I really had no problem in 3 basically making my party Garrus and Tali. So, and if for anyone who's curious, the next one up would probably be Rex. But moving on. Actually, that's a complete lie. The next one up would be Morden. But anyways, let's move on. Oh, okay. There was actually a rather lengthy discussion in the comments about one of my videos, and several questions were directed at me during this. What do I think about Renegade options, and why? I made the statement that Renegade does not equal evil, and while I stand by that statement in Mass Effect 1 and 2 with one exception. That would be Mass Effect 2 with Morinth, in case you're curious. The option to go with her is evil. Let's just be completely honest with ourselves. That was actually evil, not Renegade. But other than that one exception, the Renegade option is usually just Renegade. It's not evil. It's just ends justify the means, or willing to take the risk, or intimidate over diplomacy, that kind of thing. In Mass Effect 3, there were several instances where Renegade actually did equate evil, and my favorite example of that is probably shooting Morden in order to obtain the aid of the Solarians in favor of the Krogan, and damning the Krogans to whatever in the process. I'm still willing to give that a little bit of a pass, because if you've ever seen that scene, Shepard looks disgusted at himself or herself for doing it, and then flings the gun away in horror. But it was still an evil act, let's be honest with ourselves. And a lot of the Renegade options in Mass Effect 3 felt more evil than they should have, in my opinion. The whole point of the Renegade and Paragon thing was that it was no longer about good and evil. It had been about good and evil since forever, all the way back to, I actually don't remember which game started that, but it was always good versus evil, light versus dark. Paragon Renegade, neither side is supposed to be evil or good. They're supposed to be Paragon and Renegade. And I think they slipped the ball on that Mass Effect 3. But I'm sorry, I hate to keep bashing Mass Effect 3, but that was one of the questions I was asked. So moving on. Will I review Mass Effect 1? Yes. Will I review Mass Effect 2? Yes. I will be reviewing them separately because they are extremely different games, and in a lot of ways, not just in gameplay, which is the obvious one, but in style, in concept, and in story. So yes, I will be reviewing both of those in the future. They're doing a James Vega anime. What are your thoughts on this? Oh, sorry. No, but in all seriousness, they can do whatever they want with the tie-ins and the extra stuff. That kind of thing can be done well. I point to Warcraft and the many Warcraft books that are excellent, and I do recommend, by the way, as a good way to do tie-ins like that. Or they can do tie-ins poorly. I will point to The Matrix for an example like that. So this sounds like a tie-in that is being done poorly, in my personal opinion. But I'm not going to place any judgment on it till then. However, I don't care that much about James Vega, and I don't like anime in general. So, moving on. Okay. This is another combination question. A lot of people were talking about Mass Effect 3 Perfect Edition, or sometimes Mass Effect 3 Arshangaya Edition, and what is the practicality of that? And a lot of people pointed out that all the things I was talking about in the options of having divergent choices and having your opinions actually matter, having the story do this thing, is very infeasible. And you are absolutely right. It really isn't feasible these days. It was once upon a time, but when development cycles were much shorter, and when people could spend 6 years making a game and still turn a profit on it. But nowadays, that there are other concerns getting in the way. That's still possible, but it's much less likely. And the development time for making a game like that would be hideous. It would be beautiful if they pulled it off. And I do personally think BioWare, even now BioWare, especially with Geiger doing the doing the writing, could pull that off and pull that off well. And yeah, I'd buy that brand new. I'd buy Mass Effect 3 Perfect Edition. But there is one other thing to note about this. Having an actual divergent story takes tremendous development time. Having a story that doesn't actually change the overall central plot, but does make it feel like your changes mattered in the stake of the galaxy that and as the things were going through, would have been a lot easier to do and a lot simpler to do, and that's what Mass Effect 2 did. Mass Effect 2 took into account a lot of variables from Mass Effect 1, and a lot of them were just little flavor, just one little NPC over here, or one news report over there, or this guy will talk to you about this. But they did that, and they did that consistently, and they did that constantly. And so it really felt like you were the Shepard from Mass Effect 1, if you follow me. They could have done that with just a little bit more in Mass Effect 3, and rather than have it be changing story, it would be, this is actually my Shepard. That was one of the biggest complaints I had about Mass Effect 3. I've never actually voiced this directly. My Shepard in Mass Effect 3 didn't feel like my Shepard. The Shepard I had developed, the Shepard I had crafted, the Shepard I had shared however many dozens of hours with in Mass Effect 1 and 2. It felt like a Shepard. Their Shepard, perhaps, I'm not really sure, but it didn't feel like my Shepard, and I think that is something that should have been more strongly done. And even if they never did Perfect Edition, if they did Improved Edition, where they had more of these tie-ins and had it actually matter more, I'd buy that too, to be honest with you. Someone asked me if Deus Ex Machina is a mislabel for the Godchild. I'm going to go over this real quick. Deus Ex Machina literally means God in machine, which is from Greek plays and is defined as an artificial or improbable device resolving the difficulties of the current plot. In other words, something that comes out of left field and, whoa, shoot, and knocks over my power cable. How dare you? Mass Effect 3 is knocking around my power cable. Deus Ex Machina is something that had no foreshadowing, that has nothing to do with anything. It would be as though, let me give you a non-actual example here, a made-up example. You're going through Mass Effect 3, and you go up the beam up to the Citadel, and you go into the Citadel, and you look, and there's this giant purple thing. It's just kind of floating in the air, and it turns to you, and it says, "Lo, I have come to wipe out the Reapers for you, because you are having a bad time with it." Whoosh. And the Reapers are gone. That's Deus Ex Machina. And this is ironic I use that as an example, because the actual Mass Effect 3 ending is a perfect example of Deus Ex Machina. No foreshadowing. No hinting that there was this AI catalyst god thing. It just comes out of nowhere and says, "You win. How would you like to win?" I've got some colors set up for you. So, that is why I call it a Deus Ex Machina, because it is. What do I find most attractive about Liara personality-wise? I found this one amusing, because a lot of people tend to assume that simply because my Shepard romanced Liara that I have any sort of feelings for Liara. Obviously I don't, because she's a video game character. But more importantly, because I've never gotten into that whole romantic interest in a fictional character thing. It's never made a lot of sense to me, to be completely honest with you. I'm not dissing it. I get it that you can crush or whatever, but I've never been someone who does crushing. I've never been that kind of person. And so, when I see Liara, I see an interesting, intelligent, young woman who is a great thirst for knowledge and a great desire to help people. And I like that. And the way that romance kind of blossomed there automatically between my Shepard and her made sense to me, and that's why I went ahead and allowed it to happen, was because I didn't like Liara. My Shepard did. Segregate, if you follow me. But I would have to say, what my Shepard, I should say, found most attractive about her was the fact that she had a good heart. That she was someone who genuinely wanted to help make the galaxy a better place. Not save the galaxy, as I mentioned before, but to actually, improve the galaxy, make things better for everyone. Let's see. What do I think about forced multiplayer in Mass Effect 3? That's an interesting question. I want to emphasize that forced thing, because I actually like the multiplayer in Mass Effect 3. I do. I still play it every now and again whenever my friends hop on and say, "Hey, let's go kill some Reapers for a while." Okay. But forced multiplayer is a completely different thing. I do not think it should have been forced. I do not think it should have been tied to the single-player campaign in any way, shape, or form at all. The whole Galaxy at War thing should have been ejected. The ability to import your guys is neat, but also should have been ejected. I do not like that idea at all. The only reason I had no problem with it personally is because I was going to multiplayer anyways. And I don't think people should have to do that in order to get a better war rating. I disagree with that completely. Is it wrong to feel this devastated about a game? This is actually a rather lengthy statement this person wrote up for me, so I apologize for again for simplifying it to a single sentence. No, it is not that wrong to feel that devastated about a game, or indeed about anything you have a great deal of emotional investment in. You know, if you were really into refurbishing antique cars and one of them got run over by a train, or got rained on and had the paint spoiled, or had real gouges put into it by some kids who were playing nearby. You can go with whatever severity you'd like here. Would that not be devastating to you if you really cared about that? If you really put your time and effort and energy into it? Yes, of course it would be. So I think it's absolutely natural to be devastated about something that you actually put real, here, time and energy and effort and thought and emotion into. I've said this for years. People have been decrying video game for the last 25 years. It's just another thing that we do to liven up our lives, to enjoy our lives, and we do put part of ourselves into it. So, why does it not matter exactly? Just because it's a game? No, no, no. That's not how that works. So yeah, I see no problem with that. I just, a degree of moderation as always. If you end up doing really horrible things like committing suicide or whatever over a game, then okay, you have officially gone too far. Because if you're doing that over anything, you have officially gone too far. Last question about Mass Effect. When you're done with the Mass Effect 3 DLC, would you consider making a video of you throwing it off a bridge or melting the discs? Well, I would, but unfortunately, since I own a digital copy, that would involve me melting and throwing my laptop here off the bridge. So no, I'm afraid I'm not going to do that. Although I have to admit that would look rather interesting from the perspective of the webcam for about a minute or so. Last bunch of questions. My goodness. I can't believe I had so many questions this time. I really can't. I go home in like 20 minutes. Okay. What do you think when you're... What do you do when you're done with videos and you're still at work? Other than work, obviously, was the question. I think that's an interesting question because obviously I do my job. But no, what else I do here is I work on my stories. I do a lot of writing. I do a lot of brainstorming for how exactly I want a plot to make sense. One of the things I'm really big on is a plot making sense. And so I spend a lot of times thinking, well, I want this to happen, but that doesn't make sense. So I have to actually think it out. I have to actually develop it. I do things like that. Sometimes I chat with my friends. Sometimes I listen to music. Whatever. Do I think I'll be making a move towards the gaming industry? No. And the answer is the same reason I said no to that idea about, I guess about 12 years ago now. I was actually going through college with the intent of getting a degree, with the intent of getting into the gaming industry until I started really looking into it and found out exactly what it's like working under a publisher. So I made a slightly different idea there, which of course leads me into my next question. Have I ever tried to make a game out of one of my settings? Yes, I have. I tried to make an MMO out of one of my settings before WoW came out, in case you're curious. This was actually before WoW was even in the beta. And that I'm not going to say we were well into development. We were probably about a year or so away. It was all code that needed to be done at that point. But that fell through because WoW came out. I'll just summarize. This is actually a long story, and we had scared up all the funding necessary to get the servers and get the server farm set up, and we had a guy for networking, a guy for design, a guy for code, We were basically ready to go, and then World of Warcraft actually went, live. That's actually not true. What happened is Warcraft went into beta. I started playing, and I said, guys, we've lost. And we did. Nobody expected World of Warcraft to explode that much at the time, except for me. I knew it was going to. I can't even explain how. But it had all the right features, and it did, and the market changed. And at that point, we couldn't have done our game anymore. It wouldn't have made profit anymore. That was right in the dirge there of post-WoW, so that never happened. Let's see. Would I want an option for romance and or sex to be disabled in a game? Yes. God, yes. Yes, I would. Personally, I would probably just disable the sex aspect because I don't think it adds anything to the game, at least not for me. Having a romance in the game doesn't bother me. If I see a character that my character might actually be interested in, yeah, sure, like I mentioned with the Liara example, but shrug, actually a better example than Liara would be Bastila Shawn back in KOTOR, which I thought that relationship should have developed the way it did and should have actually grown because it made sense to me. And so, and it also was technically in canon, but I didn't know that at the time. So, yeah, okay, romance is fine. Can I disable the sex or both? Having an option for both is fine. I prefer options in general. What are my opinions on Star Trek 2009, the James Abrams film? I try not to comment too much about Star Trek things. I am a Trekker, not a Trekkie. And I do tend to think slightly different than most Trekkers or Trekkies that I know. And actually, if anybody who's familiar with the community of Star Trek fans in general, whether they're Trekkers or Trekkies or just kind of there is no such thing as a consensus in the group. There really isn't. You know, you've heard of the odds are suck and evens are good rule. No, no, no. They don't even adhere to that. Everyone thinks something differently. And so I try to keep my mouth shut about things like that. So let me put it this way. I did enjoy the Abrams film. No, I didn't think it's one of the classics, or rather, I don't think it's one of the awesome ones. I don't think it deserves to be in, like, say, the top five. But I don't think it was crap either. I think it was still enjoyable, and I really did get into the movie. There were a few logical flaws, and there were a few things that were just a little bit silly. But the only thing I could say from that entire movie that really, really bothered me was when Kirk's hands started swelling for no reason. It didn't add anything to the scene. It was just there for comic relief, I guess. I don't know. Star Trek what do I think about Star Trek games in general? Now that's interesting because there are only two sets of Star Trek games I've ever enjoyed ever, which is really a shame. The Interplay, which is a company that doesn't even really exist anymore in any real sense of the word, made a bunch of Star Trek adventure games way back in the early 90s, the 25th anniversary, and I can't even think of the name of the other ones. And they were just little short adventure stories, and they really were. There was no overall story. It was not a long, arced game. It was more like episodes, which worked actually, which worked really well. You'd have this one episode on this planet, and you'd solve the puzzle, and then you'd do the thing, and you'd figure out this, and blah blah blah, and you'd do the next planet next. It was really enjoyable. It was really fun, and I really enjoyed those games, and I still have those games actually. The only other Star Trek game I've ever enjoyed, believe it or not, is Star Trek Online. Star Trek Online uh, is an enjoyable game from a gameplay perspective, even if the story is extremely lackluster. And I did enjoy the fact that I could actually have, a decent level of space combat and a decent level of ground combat, and it was good enough. It was not good enough that I actually bought it. Obviously, it was not good enough that I'm playing it now, even now that it's free. But it was at least enjoyable. Other than that, I can't think of anything. I've played several, didn't like several. Oh well, it is a shame because there's some potential there in my opinion. But moving on, why is Babylon 5 one of my favorite shows? Now that's an interesting question. And that's actually a long question, so I'm going to only give you one reason because there's a lot of reasons. The one reason is because J.J. Abrams, wait, not J.J. Abrams, damn, I'm getting tired. JMS. JMS, when he was doing Babylon 5, had this show written basically front to back before they started filming, before they started casting even. So he had a coherent picture in mind, if you follow me here. And when you have that, it allows you to do things with foreshadowing, with hinting, with setup. It allows you to make the plot make more sense. It allows you to eliminate plot holes in general. Everything can flow better, and it gives you a wonderful sense of, I want to watch it again, because the second time around, you're going to be aware of everything that's happening, and then you're like, oh, it was that guy way back in episode 2, oh, that makes so much more sense now, that kind of a thing. And so that I would list as my primary reason why I loved Babylon 5, because it was designed from the get-go as one cohesive setting. Like I said, that's how I do my settings as well. I don't start on actually presenting it either in D&D terms or a book or whatever I'm doing until I have the whole cohesive unit right here ready to go. So, will I do a review about Babylon 5? I have no intention of doing that, partially because Sci-Fi Debris does that already, and he does an excellent job as is, and partially because I'm not sure how I'd go about doing that. I could discuss the series and go into depth about it, like I do with video games, but I don't know. Let's put that on the maybe pile. So, what are some of my favorite TV shows? I've heard you mention Babylon 5 quite a bit. Yes, I have. I apologize if I feel like I'm spamming it. But Babylon 5 is not my only favorite TV show. As I mentioned earlier, Farscape is one of my favorites as well. Futurama is on that list as well. I also like several of the Star Treks. I'd probably list TNG as my favorite, followed by Deep Space Nine. Yes, I know a lot of these are sci-fi. But I also really, really love Top Gear, the British version, the UK version. The one with James May and Clarkson and Hammond, in case you're wondering. And past that, TV show-wise, I think that's about it for my actual favorites. I know that's several. So, and all for their different reasons, and I'm not going to go into the details there because this is already going on way too long. What does ADHD stand for? Attention Deficit Hyperactivity Disorder. It is something that has to do with someone who has an inability to have attention to something, tends to be very impulsive, tends to be very hyperactive. And this is one of those things I try not to talk about too much, but let's just say that in general, medically speaking, very few people actually have ADHD. They say they do, or they think they do, to use it as an excuse, but they do not medically have the chemical disorder that causes that, if you follow me. It can develop over time for obvious reasons because stimuli and all that, but let's just leave that alone. That's what that stands for. That's what the question was. Let's move on. Have I heard about Euclidean and their unlimited detail real-time rendering technology? Yes, I have. It's still in development. I've seen a great deal about it. I think it has real promise. The real difficulty they're going to have to overcome is finding an engine that can properly render that without herniating it itself, basically. There are some difficulties that are involved, which I'm not going to bore you all with, regarding the code and how they'll actually use the processing and the engine involved, that they're going to have to overcome. But I think it has very real promise, and it would be very interesting to see a game that actually uses that if they can overcome those difficulties. Will I do podcasts? Very simple question. I haven't really decided yes or no on that one, partially because that's kind of a live thing, and because of my schedule. Tonight is an excellent example. I intended to start this review like back at 11, and I didn't get out here until like 2 because of work, so probably not in the foreseeable future. Maybe if I win the lottery. When I'm playing a game, what is the first thing that turns me off to the point of not even having the drive to continue a playthrough? That's actually an interesting question. Two things I'm going to go ahead and label here because you asked for one thing, but I'm going to give you two. Double special. The first thing I've already mentioned before, excuse me, and that is the lack of purpose, the lack of a reason to keep playing. If I'm just playing Warhammer 40K tabletop, right? I find that interesting. I find that fascinating. And it can be enjoyable on a limited basis. But the more you want to do it with me, the less I will want to, because as I'm doing it, I'll just start thinking, what's the point? There's no goal I'm accomplishing. There's no leveling I'm doing. There's no, conquering territory. Nothing is being accomplished. And so a lack of accomplishment or a feeling of a lack of accomplishment is something that will prevent me from playing a game. This is actually what has been preventing me from replaying Mass Effect 3, because the ending has so sapped my will to play that game because I'm not actually accomplishing anything, if you follow what I'm saying here. I'm not actually getting anywhere. I'm not actually doing anything. I'm just dutzing around and wasting time, basically. And so that gets to me. The second reason I could stop playing a game is actually a lot simpler to explain. That is the music. I am very big on music in video games, very, very big on it, and have been since forever, since the NES. And if you have truly bad music to the point where I genuinely don't enjoy it or it hurts my ears, for example, I will put that game down. I'll give you an example of that right now. Xenogears on the PlayStation 1. I wanted to keep playing that. I played it on mute for quite a while. But the desert town, whose name I can't think of right now, the music there was when I finally had to actually just turn the volume off on the TV because it hurt my ears. And it was so bad. I hated it. And for any of you who know in the audience right now who is just saying, "Oh, but that was Mitsuda." Yes, it was Mitsuda. Mitsuda didn't do Chrono Trigger in a vacuum. Mitsuda did Chrono Trigger with Nobuo Uematsu, the god of video game music, sitting over his shoulder and telling him what to do. And it shows because all the music in Chrono Trigger has Nobuo Uematsu's stylistic um, markers to it. The signature. There we go. Stylistic signatures to it, and you can tell that if you've really studied the music, like I have. Whereas Xenogears was Mitsuda, riding the coattails of that success because he got most of the credit because he technically wrote most of the songs, and he did that for Chrono Cross as well. And in both cases, the music was, in my opinion, because music is a very opinionated thing, terrible, and I hated it. And so that is something that will make me stop playing a game because I really don't want to have to mute my game just to enjoy it. Next question. Where was I? Okay. With a gamer's desire to have his or her choices matter, what ways do you see future games meeting this challenges? Could programmers use AI to create games like Mass Effect that are more open-ended? That is an interesting question, and one that is actually going to take a lengthy debate, so I'm going to summarize this. I apologize. You deserve more of an answer for that, but the bottom line is that creating true AI in order to deal with something like that is something that is more or less required in order to have an actual level of true interactive video gaming. Let me give you an example real quick, okay? If you're D&Ding with me, and I can only speak for myself, if you're D&Ding with me, I'm GMing. I'm running this game. You can do anything in this game, and I will adapt to it. I know how to do that. I am a thinking, living, sentient being who can adapt to whatever you're doing. And the game, because I am the game, basically. You are imagining it, and you're imagining it, and you're imagining it over there. But ultimately, I am the actual system. I am the cartridge that you have plugged into the game, to your minds here. This is a really weird analogy. Forgive me. But because I can think for myself and I am sentient, I can adapt literally to anything. And that's what I do. That's how I run my D&D games. You can do whatever. I would like you to kind of follow the plot, especially if I have a story-based D&D campaign like the one I'm about to start running. But the point is I can adapt that plot, however, to anything you do. And that is kind of what it is required for that. An excellent example of this, I've heard this debated a lot, and I have myself have debated this, is that the holodeck in Star Trek is a true AI because it adapts to anything. It will adapt the characters to any stimuli that you provide to it. And that requires a true AI in order to do that. That requires a thinking something in order to adapt like that. So I think that is possible, that is very dangerous for obvious reasons. And I also think we are way, 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 way away from that. That's going to be probably not even in my lifetime. Of course, I'm not that young, but whatever. Next question. Are there any RPGs or stories coming out I would recommend? Really low on adventures at the moment, or alternatively books. Is there anything like that I would recommend? I do have a couple things I'd recommend. Diablo 3, Guild Wars 2, Last Story, Xenoblade, and all the Guild Wars books and the Warcraft books. Next question. I was wondering if you'd played Deus Ex Human Revolution. Now, I apologize because I don't remember off the top of my head if that's the new one or the old one, but I have played both. I do think the old one was awesome. I do think the new one was good. The only thing that spoiled the new one for me was the ending, ironically. The endings. But I do think that the old one was superior personally, and I think it's not because of anything other than simple storytelling. And just in a nutshell. I really wish someone would make a proper modern remake with the new engine and the new customization, UE, modern conveniences of, the modern era, with the old story. That would be awesome. What is or was the game you are sinking the most time into? As far as the most time played in any given game, obviously Final Fantasy VI and Chrono Trigger are probably at the top of. Actually, that's not true. They're probably not at the top of that list. Let's be honest. An MMO is going to be at the top of the list, and there's two: Asheron's Call and World of Warcraft have both. I think by this point in time, World of Warcraft probably has overall soaked up more time. But the two of those are definitely at the top of that list. As far as single-player games, we've got Final Fantasy VI, Chrono Trigger, Morrowind, definitely Morrowind, probably Oblivion as well, but Morrowind much more so because I played Morrowind several more times than I did Oblivion, which I only played through like a grand total of 4 times, I believe. And any Pokemon game, basically. I don't think I've ever said this on these things, but I do actually enjoy Pokemon and the games, I should say, not the TV series or anything like that. But I do enjoy the games quite a bit, and most of my Pokemon games usually average about 200 hours per game, which is pretty normal for me in those. So, what do I think about pre-programmed dialogues? This is talking about the whole concept of. This is part of a discussion as to whether or not you felt like your character was behaving in the way you wanted them to, as opposed to, actually being able to pick your own options and having it show. For example, in Dragon Age 1, someone could say, hey, da-da-da-da-da-da, and you wouldn't have 2 options, or 3, actually. You wouldn't have 3 options, you'd have 5. And by having so many more options like this, you had the ability to choose what kind of tone you wanted to get across with your character. And Dragon Age Origins pulled that off rather well, for example, as opposed to, say, Mass Effect 3, which had the 3 and occasionally just the 2 here. Ooh, that's hard to do. And that didn't really feel, that contributed to the whole why my Shepherd thing. So pre-programmed dialogue is something you can do. You just have to do it right. Next, will I do a video about music? That's a very interesting question. I'm not sure I'm going to do that. I'm not exactly a professor at music, but music is one of the most important things to my life. Probably I'd say the second most important thing, with video games being third. And I do listen to music more or less constantly. I have a massive archive. I actually make music myself, blah, blah, blah. And I've been doing so since I was in high school. I actually was failing music theory back in high school, though, but that was the teacher's fault, who argued with me violently and loudly and was yelling and cussing because I was trying to explain how, to me, the way I think, music is math. Music is equations that can be expressed. That's what a chord is an equation, right? And he was screaming at me, and how dare I demine his music with all that, blah blah blah. And I ended up just dropping that class actually. But anyways, I don't know if I'd do an actual video about it. I'm not sure what I'd talk about. I really don't know where I'd go with that. But I do consider music a very important part of my life, so I'll at least consider it. Um, Speaking about music, next question: do I listen to any metal music or heavy metal? I don't know if Rammstein, I'm not sure I'm pronouncing that correctly, counts, but there are two songs by Rammstein that I actually do enjoy, and I suppose there are three Marilyn Manson songs I enjoy. Yeah, three, and I don't know if that's considered heavy metal or heavy rock or whatever. I don't keep up with genres very well. Um, why don't I do game reviews for some site? This is actually an interesting question because a friend of mine posed this to me as well. He was talking about how it was possible that if I keep doing these reviews, someone like not zero punctuation, the site zero punctuation is on, the escapist, there we go, could pick me up and be like, hey, you want to be a reviewer full time? I sincerely that it's going to happen. Number one, I don't really have a lot of exposure. Don't get me wrong. I really enjoy the amount of views I get. I really enjoy the amount of responses I get, and I really like the fact that I get to, share this my enjoyment and my enthusiasm with video games with so many people. But ultimately, when you're talking from a marketing perspective, if you're looking at the overall market of the internet, my market is incredibly minuscule. I don't even register on the map. So it's incredibly unlikely that anyone from any actual site that does that, such as the Escapist, is ever going to even notice I exist. Second problem is my reviews are like about an hour long. That's just kind of become the average length these days because I really like to go in depth. I really like to really explain and discuss a game rather than just say it was great. You look at most of those reviews. Yahtzee with zero punctuation is a great example. His reviews are 6 to 8 minutes long. Mine are an hour. Nobody's going to pay for that. And finally, of course, is the fact that I tend to cover games in general as opposed to new games that are coming out. Although there's some practicality reasons for that. Next question. Have I thought about writing books? Technically, I already have written books, two of them, actually, and several short stories. Actually, according to one of my friends, one of them qualifies as a novella based on the length. Moving on. And no, I don't think I'm ever going to do anything with them, but I did enjoy writing. I've been trying to get back into it, and I've been failing. It is hard to find the time to do it, to be quite honest with you. What is the left side of my beard? No, that's actually kind of an amusing question. Let's see if I can... This area right here, I don't know if you can actually tell, there is actually no hair here at all. This is completely smooth skin. There's another spot. Where is it? There it is, right here. I have the most deformed facial hair. This is literally just a bald spot, and over here is just a bald spot, and there is no hair, and it will not grow there. So if I, for example, grow this out into the full beard thing, there will just be this white spot right here on this, and there is, as you can see, that white spot there, because no hair will grow there, and I've just kind of learned to live with it, because, it doesn't bother me that much, and especially when I've got my face like this, it's not really that noticeable. Moving on. Is there anywhere they could read any of my writings? I should have linked that earlier, I'm sorry. And would I care to share? I probably wouldn't. I am simply too ashamed of my writings. To be completely honest with you, I don't think they're that fantastic. I don't think they're that good. But, so I've never actually put them anywhere. In fact, to date, no one's ever actually read my books all the way through. I've had a lot of people, friends and family, who've been like, yeah, I'll read your books, and they get a chapter in and they put it down because they run out of time or they run out of interest or whatever. Oh my goodness, hang on a second. What specification would I suggest for a build that I'm going to use for gaming? MMO Champion does a regular thing, basically once a month, that says how to build a game, and they'll have different categories based on how much power you want and how much price you want to spend. Obviously, the more power, the more price. And I recommend waiting until they do the next one, which should be pretty soon, actually, and going ahead and using that as a default. I could go into a lot of detail because every computer I've ever used, including the one I'm on right now, is one I've built from parts, and so, because I'm good with hardware. And so I could give you a lot of information, a lot of detail, and my friends tend to come to me for things like that as well. But that's not the kind of thing I can cover in this video. So I do recommend the MMO Champion thing. They tend to be a lot easier and simpler to go through than me going into, well, you need this and that and this, and 3 hours later. What are the upsides and downsides of working at a job in regards to your schedule? I do like the fact that I'm here in the building alone, for obvious reasons. There's no one else in this building except me, because I'm the after-hours guy. There are some obvious downsides to that. I get no sun. That may not sound like a big downside, but there are actual problems with not having a lot of melanin. I have to take melatonin every night in order to tell my body it's time to go to sleep, because that's how that works. And it does affect my complexion a bit. I am a bit on the pale side. It is difficult to get any errands done because I live in the Midwest, where everybody decides closing at 8 or 9 is a great idea. I'm sorry, I'm actually from California. I'm not a native to the Midwest, and so I'm used to everything being 24 hours, which fits my schedule a lot better. Around here, I have to get up early and rush someplace. Oh my God, to get there just before they close. So there's upsides and there's downsides, and obviously my schedule is completely in contrast with everybody else's. So there's only like 2 or 3 friends I really get to hang out with within a great deal of length of time, because they're the only ones who have a similar schedule to me. Next question. Okay. I have an idea for a video game, but I don't want to go to a publisher like EA because I'll get screwed over, and I don't want to see my idea turned into garbage. I want to have at least some control over my idea. How should I go about getting this game out there? Should I start my own game company? No, you should not. What you should do is it's actually difficult to explain in full, but what I want you to do is go ahead and go to Steam, and they have an entire site and support setup structure dedicated towards getting people with their own games onto Steam, and they will not quote you any prices initially because everything is per contract. That's what they'll actually do, is they'll write a contract with you with regards to your game for any number of duration. It could be a year contract, it could be a 5-year contract, or a 10-year contract, however you want to do that. And you'll discuss it with them, and you'll work it out with them. And they will put it up on Steam, and you'll get some exposure. You might not get a lot, but to be honest with you, you're not going to get a lot no matter what you do. There's simply too many video games out there in general. So my advice is to not get discouraged. My advice is to keep at it and to be thankful if you make any level of profit at all, if you know what I mean. I'm not saying that to be like, oh, your game's going to be terrible. But what I mean is, if you break even, that is a genuine triumph. And I applaud you for that, and I do hope you actually get somewhere with that. So good luck. And that is my recommendation on the matter. And now I'm actually done. Holy crud! Just in time. So I'm going to go ahead and end this real quick. Thank you for all the questions. I can't believe how many I had. I think I got a few more while I was doing this video. I'm going to go ahead and get this thing posted before I have to go home for the night. See you later, guys.